The sun rose over Coyote Bend like a judgment. It climbed above the eastern mesas, spilling red light and heat onto the alkali flats, illuminating every speck of dust that hung in the air. The wind was already moving, a dry breath that smelled of sage and distance and carried the faint, metallic tang of the new railroad yards. Miles to the south, in the town itself, still mostly asleep. A few horses tied to hitching rails stomped impatiently, their tails switching at the first lazy flies of the morning. May Callahan felt the heat on the back of her neck. She did not bother to wipe the film of grit from her cheeks. Her focus was on a single, rotting fence post. She wrapped her worn leather gloves around the top of the post, planted her boots in the hard-pan earth, and threw her entire weight against it, trying to force it back into some semblance of straightness. The wood was dead, gray and splintered, and it groaned under her effort but did not move. She let out a frustrated sigh, her breath pluming in the cool morning air before vanishing. She stepped back and looked at the sagging line of the fence, then beyond it to the property it was meant to define. It was not much. 160 acres of stubborn dirt, dotted with creosote bushes and tough mesquite that her father, in his unending optimism, had called paradise. He had seen water where there was none and crops where nothing would grow. Now, he and her mother were gone. 3 years gone. The diphtheria had taken her mother in a fevered haze, and a runaway freight wagon in town had crushed her father 6 months later, leaving May with nothing but the land, the relentless Arizona sun, and a small, suffocating debt at the Territorial Bank. It was a debt Mr. Henderson, the banker, had been almost apologetic about for 2 years. Now, suddenly, he was deeply interested in collecting it. May knew it was not Mr. Henderson who wanted the money. It was the railroad. Men working for Silas Kincaid had ridden out to her homestead 3 separate times. The first had been polite, almost friendly, offering a few $100s for her inconvenience in moving. The second had been businesslike, his offers slightly higher, his patience clearly lower. The third man, just last week, had worn a city suit and a smile that never touched his eyes. He had not made an offer. He had told her she was being foolish and stubborn. "This land is worthless, Miss Callahan," he had said, gesturing to the dry earth. "A woman alone cannot possibly hope to work it. You have no husband. You have no son." She had told him where he and his horse could go. But his words had stuck, sharp as cactus spines. She was not entirely alone. From inside the warped, single-room cabin, a thin, rattling cough cut through the morning. Jamie. Her brother was 12 years old, but he looked closer to 8. He was made of thin bones and pale skin, and he housed a heart that beat with a frantic, unsteady rhythm, like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. The tonic from the doctor in Tucson was expensive. The travel to get it was expensive. Everything was expensive, and her meager income from mending clothes for the townswomen and selling the occasional tough-skinned eggs from her few chickens was not enough. Now, the banknote was due. The railroad men were not coming back with offers. They were coming back with lawyers, and Jamie's bottle of medicine was almost empty. May picked up the heavy hammer, its handle smooth and dark from her father's sweat, and struck the side of the post, trying to wedge it tight with a few rocks. The fence would not hold against a determined cow, let alone the railroad, but it was all she had. Miles away, where the flat desert floor cracked open into the deep, shadowy canyons of the Din, Ashkenaz sat motionless on his black horse. He was high on a sandstone mesa, a position that gave him a view of everything from the distant ribbon of the town to the sprawling, noisy encampment of the railroad surveyors. He watched the white canvas tops of their wagons, little specks of white moving across the land, and the small, arrogant red flags they pounded into the earth. He had seen those flags before, closer to his own people's land. They were an infection, a promise of steel and smoke and fences, the Kincaid Railroad. Beside him, his cousin Naomi Bigay adjusted the blanket on her own mount. She was a woman who saw the shape of things, The patterns the white men left on the land. Her voice was low and tight, meant only for him. They cut deeper this time. Ashki, she said in their language. They moved toward the springs, the place where the women gather the herbs. Ash said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the haze of Coyote Bend. He was a man balanced on a knife's edge. He understood the white man's tongue. He had worn their blue coats, scouting for the soldiers years ago. He had done it believing he could build a bridge, teach them which lands were sacred and which could be shared. He had been wrong. It had earned him nothing. From his own elders, it earned suspicion. They saw him as a man who had taken the white man's silver, a man who knew their ways too well. From the white men, it earned a thin, temporary respect that vanished the moment they did not need him. They paid him for his eyes, but they despised him for his blood. He was Ash to the soldiers, a short, clipped name they could pronounce. He was Ashki to his people. He felt like neither. He was a ghost haunting the lands between the Hogan and the fort, and he was tired. He was so very tired of talking. Silas Kincaid arrived in Coyote Bend not with the grit of the trail on him, but with the soot of the engine. His private rail car, all polished wood and velvet curtains, was shunted onto a temporary siding with a groan of protesting steel. He stepped from the car onto a specially placed stool, wearing a black suit of eastern wool and a hat that had never seen a cattle drive. He lit a thick cigar, the smoke a fragrant blue plume in the harsh, dry air, an insult to the morning. He did not bother with the hotel or the general store. He walked with brisk, purposeful strides directly to the center of town, old Ben Harper's saloon. It was just past 10 in the morning, and the saloon was empty save for 3 men. Old Ben himself, a man whose face was a map of wrinkles, was slowly wiping the long wooden bar, his expression as neutral as a stone. Sheriff Boone was there, his silver star pinned to a vest that was straining slightly at the buttons. He was a man who preferred his town quiet, and Kincaid made things loud. And in the corner, nursing a glass of water, sat Indian Agent Crowley, a weasel of a man whose salary was paid by the government but whose loyalty was sold to the highest bidder. Silas Kincaid did not bother with greetings. He slapped a rolled map onto a dusty poker table, the sound making the sheriff jump. He spread it open, pinning the corners with empty whiskey glasses. His thick, manicured finger tapped a small, neatly drawn square on the map. "That," he said, his voice smooth and cold as a river rock, "that is the problem. The Callahan homestead." Sheriff Boone shifted, pulling at his collar. "Now, Silas, that is May Callahan's place. She is a young woman, all alone out there. Save for her sick brother. She is not selling. Told my deputy as much." Kincaid took a long, slow pull from his cigar, letting the smoke out in a cloud that momentarily obscured his face. He looked at Crowley, who smiled thinly, then at Boone, who looked away. "Boone, I do not care about the girl or her brother," Kincaid said evenly. "I care about this." He dragged his finger across the map. "The spur line must go through here. It is the only feasible pass. That exact spot," he tapped the square again, "is the perfect location for the new depot and the water tower. It is essential." "But she has the claim," Boone muttered, already sounding defeated. "She is a poor, single woman," Kincaid snapped, his civility evaporating. "She will sell, or—" He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We will find a way for the law to make her leave. This territory has regulations. Surely a lone woman, unable to properly work the land, poses a risk. Perhaps she is not a fit guardian for the boy." Old Ben stopped wiping the bar. The only sound was the buzz of a fly against the window. "Get it done, Boone," Kincaid said, rolling up his map. "I want that land clear by the end of the month." "The law?" May sank onto her rickety porch step as the sun grew hotter, pulling the bank's letter from her apron pocket. She did not need to read the words again. She knew them by heart. Foreclosure. If the outstanding interest, a sum of nearly $80, was not paid by the 1st of next month, the property would be seized by the bank and sold at public auction. An auction that Silas Kincaid would undoubtedly win. It was not just the bank. Kincaid's lawyers had been busy in the territorial capital. May had heard the talk in town. New homestead regulations, pushed through by the railroad lobbyists, made it harder for single women to hold contested land claims. Without a husband, without an adult son to work the land, her title was vulnerable. The law was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at her. She was a woman alone, and in this world, that was a sickness, a weakness the vultures were circling. That evening, the air in the cabin was close and hot. May sat by Jamie's cot, gently wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. His breathing was a shallow, papery sound. He had been quiet all day, but as she moved to dim the lamp, he whispered, "I saw him again. May—" May paused, her hand on the lamp key. "Saw who? Honey, there was no one here today." "The Navajo," Jamie whispered, his eyes, usually dull with his sickness, finding hers in the dim light. "The one on the black horse. He was on the ridge this afternoon, just watching." A familiar prickle of fear and unease ran down May's spine. "Jamie, I have told you, you are not to go outside alone. It is not safe." "He is not bad, May," Jamie insisted, a spark of energy in his voice. "He is the one I told you about, who pulled little Timmy Spencer from the flash flood last spring when the creek rose. Mrs. Spencer was screaming, and the men were just standing there, but he rode his horse right into the water and grabbed him." May knew the stories. Everyone in town did. The incident had been the talk of Coyote Bend for months, a solitary Navajo warrior who appeared when trouble started and vanished just as quickly. Some said he was a ghost, a remnant of the tribes that had been pushed out. Some said he was a dangerous renegade, wanted by the army. They said he had a long, pale scar that ran down his left cheek, from his temple to his jaw. They said his eyes were as sharp and cold as the night sky. She had heard the name Ashnez whispered in the general store, spoken with fear by the railroad men and with a strange, grudging respect by the old-timers. May Callahan had never seen him. To her, he was just another part of the harsh, dangerous land that existed just beyond her failing fence. Later that night, the swinging doors of old Ben Harper's saloon pushed open and closed, letting in gusts of warm, dusty air and the lonely sound of a distant coyote. The place was full now. Cowboys from the Bartee Ranch, railroad surveyors spending Kincaid's money freely, and a few weary prospectors nursing cheap whiskey. The talk was loud, bouncing off the low ceiling, and it centered, as it always did, on two things: the railroad's progress and the Indian trouble. "They are getting bolder," one of Kincaid's surveyors announced, slamming his glass on the bar. "Saw 3 of them watching us from the cliffs today. Just sitting there, staring. Savages, the whole cursed lot of them." "Crowley ought to run them off," another man slurred, gesturing with his bottle. "This is white man's land now. He needs to push them further west, back to the reservation." Old Ben moved slowly down the bar, refilling a glass. "That is the trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. "They were here long before you, son, long before Kincaid, long before the railroad, long before Coyote Bend." "They are wild animals, Ben," the surveyor scoffed. "Are they?" old Ben said, stopping his work. He looked at the man. "Was it a wild animal that rode into 10 feet of flash flood water to save Timmy Spencer last spring, while the rest of you brave men stood on the bank and watched?" The saloon went quiet. The surveyor's face flushed red. "That was different," he muttered. "That was one man?" "Was it?" Ben said. "Or is it just the one time you bothered to look?" A quiet rancher in the corner, nursing a single beer, spoke into the silence. "My grandfather traded with the Dine, said they were hard, proud people, but fair. Maybe they are just watching because every time we move, we take something, and they are wondering what we are going to take next. The surveyor glared at him, but said nothing. The tense, divided silence was a perfect picture of the territory. As that same sun, now a dying ember, began to bleed out over the western horizon, May Callahan stood at her cabin door. The air was cooling, turning the sweat on her skin to a chill. She looked at the small pile of rocks she had jammed around the base of the fence post. It was a tiny, useless victory. A single grain of sand against a rising tide. The bank notice in her apron pocket felt like a lead weight, pulling her down. She watched the last sliver of light fade from the hills. The land her father had loved. The land that was about to be stolen from her. A cold, hollow dread settled in her stomach. She was losing. Miles away, in the high desert canyons, Ashnez watched the same sunset. The sky was a vast, open wound, bleeding purple and orange, a terrible beauty that the white men could not fence or own. He had returned to his hidden camp. Naomi was already tending the small, smokeless fire, her movements economical and sure. Ash ran a thumb over the smooth, worn wood of his father's old bow, which leaned against the sandstone wall. Next to it, oiled and ready, lay the Winchester rifle he had earned for scouting for the Blue Coats. One weapon was his past, his heritage. The other was his compromised, complicated present. He looked toward the distant, unnatural glow of the railroad camp, and then at the faint, flickering lights of Coyote Bend. He did not want another war. He had seen too much blood soak into this red earth, blood from his people and from the whites. But he wondered, as he stared into the deepening twilight, if the choice was still his to make. The bottle of Jamie's tonic was almost dry, just a dark, sticky ring at the bottom. The banknote was due in 3 days. May had spent the last 2 days mending every torn shirt and busted seam she could get from the women in town, earning just enough coins for one more bottle of medicine. It was a terrible choice. The money should have gone to the bank, a hopeless gesture to delay the inevitable. But Jamie's breathing had grown shallower, his skin paler. The bank could wait, but her brother's heart could not. She left him sleeping, a small, frail lump under their father's thick wool blanket. Even though the morning was already warm, she put a jar of water and a piece of hardtack biscuit beside his cot, where he could reach them without standing. She took the old buckboard wagon. Her horse, a sway-backed mare named Patience, was too tired to carry her all the way to town and back in 1 day. But the wagon would at least let the animal rest on the downhill slopes. The trip into Coyote Bend was silent and tense. She tied Patience outside the general store, her eyes scanning the street. She saw 2 of Kincaid's surveyors watching her from the porch of the hotel, their boots up on the railing. They stopped talking as she passed, their eyes following her. She felt their gaze like a physical weight, a pressure on her shoulders. She bought the medicine and a small bag of flour, her hands trembling slightly as she counted out the coins. She did not linger. She just wanted to get home. The road back was worse. The sun was high, a relentless white eye in a cloudless sky, baking the earth and reflecting off the pale dust. The wagon wheels kicked up a fine powder that coated her clothes and filled her lungs. She was in the narrow part of the trail, where the road cut between 2 low, rocky mesas, when she heard the sound of a horseshoe striking stone from somewhere above her. Patience snorted and tossed her head, her ears pricking forward. "Easy, girl," May murmured, her own heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. A rifle shot cracked the air. The sound was flat and brutal. A chip of rock exploded from the canyon wall not 3 feet from her head. Patience screamed, rearing in the traces, and the wagon lurched violently. May was thrown against the side of the buckboard, her arms striking the hard wood. "Whoa, whoa, girl!" Another shot. This one kicked up dust near the horse's front feet. This was not a warning. "Stop the wagon. Missy, stop it now," a voice echoed from the rocks above. May hauled back on the reins with all her strength, her knuckles white. Patience, terrified, finally stood still, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged snorts. 3 men on horseback emerged from a narrow gap in the rocks ahead, blocking the path. They were not Indians. They were white men, their faces covered with dirty bandanas, their hats pulled low. They looked like common trail trash bandits, but their horses were too well fed, their rifles too new. "Just a lone woman," one of the men said, his voice a mocking drawl. He rode closer, his rifle held lazily across his lap. "What you got in that wagon worth all this trouble?"
"I do not have any money,"
May said, her voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady.
"I just have flour and medicine for my brother. Please, he is sick."
"Medicine, huh?" The leader, a big man with a dark stain of tobacco on his bandana, spat onto the dust. "We are not here for your medicine. We are here to give you some advice." He kneed his horse forward until its hot breath fogged May's face.
"This land is not healthy for you, missy. Folks get sick out here. Folks get hurt, a woman alone, with a sick little boy. It is not safe."
The second man, a younger, nervous-looking fellow, laughed. "That is right. Maybe you should just pack up. Go east. Find a husband." "We will take that rifle you got tucked under the seat," the leader said, gesturing with his own weapon. "And you tell your boy, if you stay, next time we will not just be talking." He was close enough now that she could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. He reached out, not for the rifle, but for the reins, as if to lead her horse off the trail. May reacted without thinking. She grabbed her father's old, heavy Colt revolver from under the seat. It was a single action, and she had never fired it at anything but a tin can. Her hands were sweating so badly she could barely get a grip. She fumbled to pull back the hammer.
"Get back!"
she yelled, her voice a high, thin squeak.
"Get back or I will shoot."
The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He raised his own rifle, no longer lazy, and aimed it directly at her chest. "You are going to shoot me with that, little lady. You cannot even cock the thing." He was right. Her thumb slipped off the wet hammer. She was going to die. She was going to die in the dust. And Jamie would be alone. And Kincaid would take the land. The world exploded. A sound like a dry branch snapping came from the rocks above. To her left, the big man in front of her stiffened. His eyes went wide with a look of pure animal surprise. The rifle slipped from his hands. He looked down at his chest, where the feathered shaft of an arrow was now protruding. Dark and sudden, he made a small, wet sound, like a gasp, and then he simply fell sideways out of his saddle. "Ambush!" the young one screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He fired his rifle wildly toward the cliffs. A second shot, a rifle this time, echoed from the same direction. It was not a wild shot. It was a single, precise, economical sound. The nervous boy grabbed his shoulder, yelled in pain, and wheeled his horse around, digging his spurs in. The third man, who had been hanging back, did not even wait to see what happened. He was already gone, his horse's tails a blur as he disappeared back down the trail. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The silence that fell was heavier and more terrifying than the noise had been. The dust was settling. The leader lay still on the ground, his horse already moving away, grazing on a patch of dry grass. The nervous one was a speck in the distance. May was still holding the useless revolver, her entire body locked in a paralytic tremor. Her gaze was fixed on the man on the ground. The arrow in his chest was simple, unadorned, but its message was final. She heard a single horse approaching, not from the road, but from the rocks. It was a steady, unhurried walk. A man on a jet-black horse emerged from the shadows of the canyon wall, as if he had been formed from the rock and the shade itself. He did not look at her. His focus was on the distant, retreating rider, and then on the man on the ground. He nudged his horse forward, his rifle resting easily in the crook of his arm. He was a Navajo. There was no mistaking it. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt. But he sat his horse with a stillness that was not of her world. His black hair was tied back with a simple leather thong. He stopped his horse a few yards away and finally turned his head to look at her. It was him, the man Jamie had seen, the man from the stories. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his shirt. But it was his face that held her. It was a harsh, beautiful, dangerous face, and running from his left temple, cutting across his cheekbone and disappearing into his jawline, was a long, pale scar. It was not a new wound, but it was a deep one. His eyes, fixed on hers, were not angry. They were not anything. They were dark, unreadable, and held a weariness so profound it chilled her. May's brain began to work again. She was alive. She was staring at a man the town called a savage, a man who had just killed another man without a word. "You," she whispered, her throat raw. "You saved me." Ashnez dismounted in one fluid motion. He did not look at the dead man again. He walked to the young man who had been shot in the shoulder, who had fallen from his horse about 30 yards down the road while trying to escape. The man was moaning, clutching his arm, his face pale with pain. Ash knelt beside him. He did not offer comfort. He pulled the man's bandana down, revealing a terrified face, barely old enough to shave. Ash spoke, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. It was the first time she had heard him speak. His English was perfect, almost unaccented, but flat. "Who sent you?" "I do not know," the boy whimpered, tears cutting tracks in the dirt on his cheeks. "He just said, just to scare her. Nobody was supposed to get killed." Ash's hand moved, fast as a snake, and gripped the boy's wounded shoulder. The boy screamed. "Who?" Ash repeated, his voice no louder, but infinitely more dangerous. "Kincaid, Kincaid, it was Mr. Kincaid," the boy shrieked. "He paid us. He just wanted her scared. He said do not hurt her bad. Just make her want to leave. Please, God, it hurts." Ash released his grip. He looked at the boy for a long moment, his face expressionless. Then he stood up. He had heard the name. Kincaid, the railroad, the man with the red flags that were poisoning the land. It all connected. A simple, ugly line. He turned and walked back to May. She was still sitting in the wagon, the heavy revolver now in her lap. She looked like a child, small and pale, her eyes wide with shock. He saw her for what she was, a white woman, one of the people who fenced the land, who brought the soldiers, who broke the treaties. He felt nothing for her. He had acted on principle. One does not watch a woman, any woman, be murdered on the road. May finally found her voice. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a deep, shuddering wave of humiliation. She had been saved. She, a Callahan, had been forced to sit there, useless, while a man she had been taught to fear, a man her people had tried to drive out, had saved her life. I thank you," she said, the words feeling thick and wrong in her mouth. "You saved my life. I do not have any money on me, but—" She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the few coins she had left from buying the flour. "Here, this is all I have. Please take it, for your trouble." Ash looked at the coins in her dirty, trembling hand. He looked at the bottle of medicine on the wagon seat next to her. He looked at her worn-out boots and the frayed edges of her dress. He turned away, walking to his own horse. He swung himself up into the saddle. "Keep it," he said, his back to her. "Keep it to buy medicine for the boy." May stared, her hand still outstretched, the coin suddenly feeling heavy as lead. He knew about Jamie. "This road is not safe anymore," he said, looking not at her, but at the trail ahead, toward her homestead. "Do not ride it alone again." He touched his heels to his horse, and the animal moved, walking silently back toward the cliffs, melting into the shadows he had come from. In seconds, he was gone. May sat there for a full minute, the only sound the buzzing of flies and the distant, painful moans of the boy who had been shot. She finally let the coins fall from her hand. She felt a hot, bitter shame rise in her throat, more painful than the bruise on her arm. It was not just gratitude she felt. It was a deep, terrible, gut-wrenching humiliation. She had not been strong enough. She had not been smart enough. She had failed. And she had been saved by a man who looked at her with eyes that held no pity, only a cold, ancient sadness, a man her town called a savage. That night, May did not sleep. She sat in the one good chair in her cabin, her father's unloaded revolver on the table in front of her. Jamie was asleep. The new medicine on the shelf above his cot. The silence of the night was absolute. She heard the gunman's words over and over. Kincaid, he just wanted her scared. Silas Kincaid. He had not just sent lawyers. He had sent men with guns. He had been willing to hurt her, to terrify her, to drive her off her own land. And the law, the bank, Sheriff Boone, they were all either on his side or powerless to stop him. She thought of the man on the black horse, Ash Nez. She saw his eyes again, dark and calm. She saw the arrow, swift and certain. He was not a man who was afraid of Silas Kincaid. He was not a man the law protected, so he was not a man the law could control. He was an outsider, just like her, but he was not weak. A thought, wild and desperate, flickered in her mind. It was insane. It was the idea of a woman pushed to the very edge. If the law only respects men, she whispered into the darkness of the cabin. If it will not listen to a woman alone. She looked at her hands, still stained with the dust of the road. Then I need a man. I need a husband, but I need one that Silas Kincaid cannot buy. The image of the tall Navajo warrior, his face marked by the scar, his eyes holding the stillness of the desert, rose in her mind. Ash Nez. He was the only man she had ever met who was not afraid, and he was the only man who, she suspected, despised Silas Kincaid even more than she did. The sun had not yet cleared the eastern mesas when May Callahan left the cabin. She paused at the door, looking back. Jamie was asleep, a small, frail shape in the pre-dawn gray, his breathing a faint, papery sound. She had left him water, the last of the hardtack, and a note written on a scrap of wrapping paper. He could not read her cursive, but he would recognize his name. She hoped it would be enough to keep him inside, to keep him from being afraid. She had told him she was going to town for supplies. It was the first time she had ever truly lied to him. She rode Patience, the old mare, this time without the wagon. Her body still ached from the attack, a deep bruise on her arm and a sharper one on her hip where she had been thrown against the buckboard. She rode northeast, toward the high, broken canyons. She followed the dry creek bed that Jamie had always pointed to, the one he said led to the Shadowlands. This was forbidden. It was perhaps the only rule that the people of Coyote Bend and the Navajo seemed to agree on. You did not cross the line. You did not ride onto their land, and they did not ride onto yours. Her father had been clear on it. They have their ways, May, and we have ours. You do not mix water and oil. You just let them be. Now, she was riding into the heart of their land, spurred on by an idea so desperate it felt like a fever. Her hands, gripping the old leather reins, were damp and cold. Though the morning air was already growing warm, she felt exposed, a trespasser. Every rock, every tall saguaro, every shadow looked like a watcher. Patience felt it too. The mare's ears were pricked forward, her steps nervous and high, her breath snorting in the quiet. May rode for nearly 2 hours, pushing deeper into the territory than she had ever dared. The land changed. The flat, dusty scrub gave way to massive formations of red rock, steep canyon walls, and a silence that was heavier than any sound. It was a silence that listened. She rounded a sharp bend in the dry wash, and the world changed. The narrow cut opened into a small, sheltered valley she had never known existed. It was green, or at least greener than her land, with a small stream running through it, lined with cottonwoods. Smoke rose from 3 low, 6-sided structures built of logs and packed earth. Hogans. A flock of sheep and goats grazed on the sparse grass, watched over by 2 young boys who froze when they saw her. They stared for a second, their eyes wide and dark, and then they vanished, disappearing into the rocks as if they had never been there. Several women gathered near one of the hogans around a large loom, stopped their work, their hands. A moment before a blur of motion over the colorful wool, went still. May pulled Patience to a halt. The mare backed up a step, sensing the wall of sudden, absolute silence. May's heart hammered so hard against her ribs she thought it might break. This was it. She had come this far. She could not turn back. She saw no savages. She saw a home. She saw a woman grinding corn on a flat stone. She saw an old man mending a saddle, his hands moving with slow, practiced skill. She saw blankets of intricate, breathtaking patterns stretched on frames. It was a community, complete and whole, and she had just burst into the middle of it. One of the women at the loom detached herself from the group and walked toward her. She was not old, perhaps a few years older than May, with a strong, calm face and eyes that held no fear, only a deep, weary intelligence. She wore a simple velveteen blouse and a long skirt, her hair tied back in the traditional Navajo way. She stopped about 10 yards from May's horse. "You are lost, white woman," the woman said. Her English was clear, the words measured. "This is not your land. You should go back." "I am not lost," May said, her voice coming out high and thin, betraying her fear. I am looking for someone, a man. His name is Ashnez." The name dropped into the silence like a stone. The woman's expression tightened. Behind her, the other women murmured, their voices low and concerned. "Ashki is not here," the woman said. Her eyes were hard. "He does not see visitors." "Please," May said, desperation making her voice crack. She swung her leg over the saddle and slid to the ground, her knees weak. "Please, I must speak with him. It is a matter of life and death. He saved me 2 days ago, on the road from town. He saved my life." The woman studied her. Her gaze moved over May's frayed dress, the dirty, tear-streaked tracks on her cheeks, and the desperate, haunted look in her eyes. This was Naomi Bigay, Ash's cousin. She had seen Ashki return from that ride, his mood darker than a storm cloud. She knew he had killed a white man, and now, here was the other half of that story, standing in the middle of their camp. "He does not," Naomi began to say again, but a voice cut through the air, stopping her. "She is already here. Naomi." The voice came from behind May, from the mouth of the canyon. May gasped and spun around, pulling the reins so hard that Patience shied. Ashnez was sitting on his black horse, not 30 yards away. He must have been watching her, tracking her, since she crossed the boundary. He walked his horse forward, not into the center of the camp, but directly toward her, his face a mask of stone. He looked, May thought with a jolt of panic, incredibly, icily furious. He stopped his horse beside Naomi, but his gaze was fixed on May. "What are you doing here?" he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air, sharp as a piece of obsidian. "Do you know the trouble you bring if the Indian agent sees you here? He will call the soldiers. He will say we have taken you. He will say we have stolen your horse." "Ashki," Naomi said softly, in their language. "She is afraid. She looks broken." "Her fear is not our concern," Ash said, his voice just as cold, but in English, for May's benefit. "Go home, white woman. We have enough problems without you." "I cannot," May said, the words bursting out of her. She let go of the reins, taking a step toward him.
I cannot go home. If I do, I will lose it. I will lose everything. You are the only one who can help me." Ash stared at her, his jaw tight. The long, pale scar on his cheek seemed to stand out, a rigid line of white against his skin. He looked at Naomi, who held his gaze, her expression unreadable. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of deep and profound frustration. He swung off his horse in one fluid motion. "Inside," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the nearest hogun. His own, "You will not speak of this in the open." May flinched at his tone but nodded, grabbing Patience's reins. "Leave the horse," he said. She dropped the reins, her hands shaking. She followed him, her worn boots sinking into the soft earth. She could feel the eyes of every woman, every child, on her back. The hogan was larger inside than it looked. The air was cool and dark, a relief from the growing heat outside. It smelled of cedar, wood smoke, and something else. Something faintly metallic and male. A small fire smoldered in a pit in the center of the floor, the smoke rising cleanly to the hole in the roof. Neatly rolled blankets were piled against one wall. A rifle, a bow, and various tools hung from the wooden supports. It was spare, clean, and felt as contained as the man who lived in it. Ash did not sit. He did not invite her to sit. He stood by the far wall, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his height seeming to fill the small, circular space. "Speak," he said, "and speak quickly. Then you will leave." May took a deep breath, forcing her body to stop shaking. She would not cry. She would not beg. She had to make him understand. "You heard the man you shot," she began, her voice low and steady, surprising even herself. "The one on the road, the one who was hurt." He said a name, Kincaid. Ash nodded once, his face impassive. "I heard Silas Kincaid. He wants my land," she said, the words tumbling out now, the story of her impossible situation. "The railroad needs it for a depot. I have a banknote. My father's note. It is due in 2 days. I cannot pay it. Kincaid has paid the banker to call it in. He will buy my land at the foreclosure auction." "This is a white man's problem," Ash said, his voice flat. "It has nothing to do with me." "But it does not stop there," May said, her voice rising with the injustice of it all. "He has changed the law. He has paid the men in the capital, the new territorial regulations. They say a single woman cannot be a head of household. They say my claim is weak because I have no husband, no grown son to work the land. My title is vulnerable. Kincaid is not just taking it. He is using the law to make it legal." Ash's expression did not change, but his eyes, if possible, grew colder. "The white man's law is a twisted thing. It is a snake that eats its own tail." "Yes," May said, seizing on his words. "And Silas Kincaid is the one holding the snake. He will get the land, and I will be homeless. My brother, Jamie, he is sick. He has a bad heart. Without the house, without medicine, he will die." She stopped, her voice breaking on the last word. She swiped angrily at her eyes. She would not cry. "But there is a way," she continued, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "There is a loophole, a way to stop him." Ash said nothing, but he was listening. "The law is biased against a single woman," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "But it cannot touch a married woman. If I am married, my husband becomes the head of household. The claim becomes his and mine. The bank cannot foreclose on a married claim the same way, not without a much longer fight. It stops the auction. It stops Kincaid. It gives me time." Ash watched her, the silence stretching. He was beginning to understand where this was going, and his posture, already rigid, became guarded. "You need a husband," he stated. It was not a question. "I need a husband on paper," May corrected, her desperation making her bold. "I need a man who has legal standing. A man Silas Kincaid cannot buy, cannot threaten, and cannot ignore."
You have standing. I heard the men in town, the surveyors. They were angry. They said you scouted for the army, that you have papers from the Indian agent, that you are recognized.
Recognized, Ash said, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. Like a branded steer. May flinched at the bitterness in his voice. But she pushed on. This was her last chance.
I am here to make a business proposition, Mr. Nez. A fair trade. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She looked him directly in the eye, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Will you be my husband for one day? The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound in the hogan was the faint crackle of the fire and the sound of May's own blood rushing in her ears. Ash did not move. He did not blink. He simply stared at her. And his face, which she had thought was already as hard as stone, seemed to harden even more. He looked, for the first time, truly, deeply shocked. May rushed to fill the silence, her words clumsy. Just for the law, that is all. We would ride to the courthouse in town, sign the paper. You would not have to. We would not. It would just be a name, a signature. Enough to stop Silas Kincaid. Enough to stop the auction. And after it is settled, after he has built his railroad somewhere else, we can undo it, an annulment, a divorce, whatever it takes. I will find a way.
And what do I get?
Ash asked, his voice dangerously soft. Money, May said, her hand flying to the small, worn leather pouch tied at her waist. It was her mother's. It held her last 3 silver dollars.
I do not have much now, but I will pay you.
I will give you everything I earn from my mending. I will sell the wagon. I will give you a percentage, 30%, of whatever I can grow. I will pay you for your time. For your family. Ash looked at the pathetic little pouch in her hand, and then he laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a short, harsh, bitter sound that seemed to scrape the air. You come here, he said, taking a step toward her, his voice low and vibrating with a sudden, controlled fury. You come into my home. You ask me to sell my name. You ask me to sell the bond of marriage. For 3 silver dollars. May recoiled, taking a step back, her hand dropping. No, it is just a paper, a formality. It is not just a paper, he snapped, his voice rising, and May flinched. To you, perhaps it is a game, a piece of the white man's law you can twist, just like Kincaid. But to my people, it is a bond of family. It is honor. It is not a thing to be bought and sold. You are asking me to become a whore.
I did not mean it like that,
May cried, horrified.
I just meant—
You do not understand what you ask, he said, turning away from her, his back rigid. He was seeing another face, a young Navajo girl from the Bitterwater clan. Many years ago, the soldiers had wanted peace. The girl's father had wanted a treaty. They had married her to a lieutenant, a man with a smiling face and cold eyes. The lieutenant had stayed for 1 winter, used her body, and left when his commission was over. He had left her with a half-white baby and a spirit that was broken. Ash had been the one to find her after she had walked into the desert without water. He would never forget the look in her eyes. I will not play this game, he said, his voice flat. Get out of my home! May's face crumpled. The last spark of hope died. She had failed. This was the end. She turned, her shoulders slumped, and pushed open the heavy blanket that covered the doorway, stumbling out into the blinding sunlight. Naomi was standing right outside, as if she had been waiting. She looked at May's tear-streaked face, then looked past her at Ash, who was standing like a statue of rage in the center of the hogan. Naomi spoke to him, not in English, but in their own language, her voice swift and sharp. Are you blind, cousin? Do you see what she is, or only that she is? Ash answered her in the same tongue, his voice harsh.
She asks me to sell myself. She offers me coins for our traditions, like a cheap blanket from the agent. She offers you a weapon, Naomi said, stepping inside the hogan, letting the blanket fall, enclosing the three of them in the cool darkness again. She turned to May. Wait, do not leave, but wait outside. May, confused and shattered, stumbled back out into the sun, her heart pounding. The village was still quiet, still watching her. Inside, Naomi faced her cousin. Her voice was low and urgent. You are a fool. Ashki, you are so busy being proud. You cannot see the battle. You heard the name. Kincaid, the railroad. I heard it, he grated. If he takes her land, where does his metal snake go? It goes right to her fence line. And where is her fence line? It is 1 mile from our springs. It is 1 mile from the winter grazing. She took a step closer to him. He will not stop. He will take her land, and then he will look at ours. He will say our goats are trespassing. He will say his engines need all the water. He will bring more soldiers. He will kill our livestock. And he will foul our water. And you will have to do more than talk. You will have to fight. Again. Is that what you want, another war for our grandmothers to die in? Ash was silent, his face grim. He knew she was right. This woman, Naomi continued, her voice softer. She is desperate. She is not evil. She is stupid. Like all of them. She does not understand our ways. But her law, this loophole, she is offering you a way inside their world. If you are her husband, you are not just a Navajo. In their eyes, you are a landowner. You are a head of household. You will have a voice in their town, in their court. You can fight Kincaid with his own weapons. You can protect her land. And in doing so, you protect our own. Ash's breathing was slow and deep. He looked at the rifle on his wall. He looked at his father's bow. Naomi was right. This was a new kind of war, a war of paper and words, a war he despised. She wants to use me, he said, his voice low. Then use her back, Naomi said simply. Use her law. Protect the land. That is all that matters. Ash stood in the dark for a long time. Naomi waited, knowing she had said all she could. Finally. He pushed past her and went outside. May was standing by her horse, her face pale, her hands twisting in the animal's mane. She looked defeated, ready to ride away and face her ruin. Ash walked to her, stopping a few feet away. He was not angry anymore. He was something else. He looked tired, as if he carried the weight of a mountain. But his eyes were clear, his resolve set. I will do it, he said. May's head snapped up. Hope, so sharp it was painful, flared in her chest. You will. Oh, thank you. I promise. I will pay you every cent I have, as soon as I can. I do not want your money, he said, cutting her off. His voice was flat, final. May's fragile hope faltered. But the plan, for one day just to sign. Ash took a step closer, and May instinctively took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. He stopped, his gaze intense. If I do this, he said, and his voice was so low she had to lean in to hear it. It will not be your game. There will be no one day. I will not be a name on a paper for you to hide behind while you play your tricks. I do not understand, she whispered. You are asking me to put my name, my honor, between you and this man Kincaid. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. Then you must understand this. If I sign that paper, if I say the words in your church, I will not be your customer. I will not be a man you have hired. He took a breath, and the next words hung in the air, heavy as stones. I will be your husband. May's blood went cold. A different kind of fear, colder and more personal, washed over her. What do you mean? I mean I will protect you, he said, his gaze locked on hers. As a husband protects his wife, I will live on your land. I will protect your brother.
I will fight this man Kincaid until he is broken, or I am dead. And I will not, he paused, his voice dropping even lower. I will not promise to undo this marriage just because you find it inconvenient. Do you understand me? This was the shocking decision. This was not the deal she had offered. This was not a business transaction. This was a life sentence. He was taking her desperate, foolish plan and forging it into something hard, something real. She was trapped. If she said no, she lost everything. Kincaid would win. Jamie would suffer. If she said yes, she was binding herself, not to a signature, but to this man, this wild, dangerous, scarred stranger who looked at her as if she were a piece of property he was agreeing to protect. The old terror rose in her. To be free of Kincaid, must she become dependent on this man? She looked at his face, at the cold resolve in his eyes. He was not lying. He was offering her a shield, but it was a shield she would have to live behind, chained to the man holding it. I have no choice, she whispered, the admission tasting like ash and dust. You always have a choice, he said. You can ride away right now, or you can agree to my terms, but there are no others. She could not ride away. She could not. She thought of Jamie's thin, rattling breath. She straightened her back, trying to gather the last scraps of her dignity. I agree, she said, her voice stronger now. I agree to your terms. Ash did not smile. He did not look relieved. He simply nodded once, as if a long and distasteful negotiation had finally concluded. He held out his hand. May looked at it. It was a large hand, calloused and scarred from work and from war. This was not a white man's handshake, a polite sealing of a deal. This was something else. Slowly, she put her own trembling, dirty hand into his. His grip was not crushing. It was just firm, warm, and utterly final. He held it for a moment, his dark eyes looking into hers, sealing a bargain that neither of them fully understood. We will go to the town tomorrow, he said, releasing her. You will get your paper. He turned and walked back to his hogan without another word, leaving her standing alone in the center of the watchful, silent village. She had just saved her land. She had just sold her freedom. And she was not sure which one mattered more. The day before the banknote was due, Ash rode into Coyote Bend alone. He did not go to May's cabin. He did not ride the buckboard. He rode his own horse, and he went directly to the small, grimy, clapboard building with the American flag hanging limply from a pole out front. The office of the Indian agent. Agent Crowley was a man who sweated, even in the dry morning air. He was hunched over a large ledger when Ash's shadow fell across his desk, blocking the light from the doorway. Crowley looked up, squinting, his pen hovering. Nez, he said, his voice oily with a false, fussy authority. What do you want? Come for your monthly allotment of Weevilly flour? Ash stood in the doorway, his height and broad shoulders seeming to fill the small frame. He did not move further into the room. He did not remove his hat. I need my papers, he said. Crowley's thin smile faltered. He put his pen down. Papers. What papers would a man like you need planning on opening a bank? My scouting papers, Ash said, his voice flat, holding no patience for the man's humor. The ones from the army, the ones that say I am civilized, the ones that give me legal standing in this territory. Crowley's eyes narrowed. He leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. He was deeply, profoundly suspicious. Ash Nez was not a man who ever wanted to be legal in the white world. He was proud, difficult, and kept to his own. That is highly unusual. Why, after all this time, do you need those, got some trouble with the sheriff? Ash looked past the agent, at a dead fly lying on the dusty windowsill. I am changing my situation, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. I am finding it easier to work with the white men if I have their paper. Crowley licked his thin lips. He did not believe him. Not for a second. But the request,
as unusual as it was a legal one. This is highly irregular. I will have to find them. It could take days. It will not take days, Ash said. It is my right. I earned them working for your soldiers. Get them. There was no threat in the words, but there was a cold, flat finality that Crowley, a man who built his career on bullying those weaker than him, immediately recognized. Crowley was a bully, and bullies are cowards. He grumbled. Fine, keep your shirt on, and shuffled to a tall, disorganized filing cabinet. He pulled out a dusty file. After 10 minutes of muttering and complaining about the government's lack of organization, he produced a single, stamped document. Here, he said, pushing it across the desk as if it were coated in filth. It says you are an affiliated scout, permitted to travel and trade among the settlements. I do not know what good you think this piece of paper will do you. Ash took the document. He folded it once, carefully, and tucked it into the inside of his cotton shirt. It will do. He turned and left as silently as he had arrived, leaving Crowley staring at the empty, sunlit doorway, feeling suddenly very uneasy, as if a game he did not understand had just begun. When Ash returned to the high canyons, the news of his intention spread through the small community, not by words, but by silence. The elders, the 3 old men who had fought in the wars before the reservations, gathered by the main fire circle, even though it was the middle of the day. They did not call for him, but he went. He stood before them. One elder, Yazi, whose face was a map of dry canyons, spoke without looking at him. You would bind yourself to one of them? He asked, his voice a dry rasp. A Bilagana woman after what they have done, after they drove us from our lands. It is a matter of the land, Ash said, his voice quiet, respectful, but firm. It is always a matter of the land, the old man said. But this is not our way. You shame your ancestors. You mix your blood with the people who would see us gone. He will see us gone, a voice said. Naomi stepped from behind one of the hogans, her hands stained with dye from her wool. She should not have spoken, but she did. Kincaid, the railroad man. She looked at the elders. Grandfathers, you know I respect you, but do you not see Kincaid will take her land, and then he will take our water? He will not stop. Ashki is doing this to protect the land, our land. The old man, Yazi, looked at her, and his eyes were full of a deep, profound sadness. You are young, both of you. You think you can use their ways without becoming them. You are wrong. He turned his back to Ash, a gesture of shunning that was more powerful than any blow. Do this, and you walk a path alone, May told Jamie that afternoon. She had to. The wedding, if one could call it that, was set for the next morning, the very last day before the banknote expired. Married, Jamie's eyes, usually so listless and clouded with his sickness, went wide. To who? To Mr. Nez, May said, her voice quiet. She was mending a tear in her mother's dress, her hands busy. To Ash. Jamie's face, pale and thin, broke into a slow, bright smile. It was the first real smile she had seen from him in months. To Ash, the one from the stories, the one who saved you on the road. Yes, honey, she said, her heart twisting. That is the one. Will he live with us? Jamie pushed himself up on his thin elbows, a flush of unhealthy, excited color on his cheeks. Will he teach me to use a bow? Will he teach me to track misses? Spencer said he rode right into the flood. Shh, May said, putting her hand on his hot forehead. You must rest. Yes, he will be here. It is to protect us, to protect the land from Mr. Kincaid. Jamie did not understand the one-day part of the original, desperate plan, and May, now faced with Ash's hard, cold terms, was glad she had never told him. How could she explain? She did not understand it herself. All she knew was that her brother, who had been fading before her eyes, suddenly looked alive. She looked at the dress in her lap. It was her mother's. A simple, pale blue cotton dress, faded from 100 washings. But it was the only good thing she owned, and it had a small, ugly tear near the hem. She took it to town late that afternoon, riding patient slowly, her mind a numb buzz. She went to the only person in Coyote Bend she truly trusted. Old Ben Harper was sweeping the dust from his boardwalk as she approached the saloon. "May," he said, his voice rough with surprise. He put his broom down. "You should not be in town alone, not after what I heard about that trouble on the road. Is the boy all right?" "He is fine. Ben, I need a favor." Her hands were trembling. She held out the folded blue dress. "I need to look nice. Tomorrow, I need this mended. I do not have much, but I can pay you next week." Old Ben looked at the simple dress, then at her face, which was pale and strained. "This is a Sunday dress. May, what is happening tomorrow that is so special?" "I am getting married," she said, her voice low. She expected him to laugh, or pity her, or scold her. Old Ben just stopped. He stared at her for a long second, his bushy white eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. "You are—" "What to who, that young fool from the general store, the one who cannot add 2 and 2. "No," May said, her chin lifting, a small spark of defiance in her. "To Ashnez." Ben's mouth opened, then closed. He stared at her, and then he did something she had never seen him do. He smiled, a slow, wide, genuine smile that cracked his weathered face into 1,000 wrinkles. "Well, I will be," he said, his voice a low rumble. He took the dress from her, his rough, calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the fabric. "That is the best piece of news I have heard in this town since the whiskey shipment came in early. You get back home to that boy. I will have this ready for you by morning. And May—" "Yes, Ben, you could not have picked a better man, though God help you both. You are going to need it." The morning of the wedding, the town was buzzing. The news had spread like a brush fire. No one knew how. Perhaps Agent Crowley had talked. Perhaps old Ben had. By 10 in the morning, the dusty street outside the small, whitewashed territorial church was full. It was not a crowd of well-wishers. It was a crowd of gawkers, of witnesses to a spectacle. The respectable women of the town were gathered in one tight, whispering knot, their faces pinched with disapproval. The men from the saloon, Kincaid's railroad surveyors, and a few local ranchers were in another, their arms crossed, their expressions ranging from crude amusement to open disgust. "A white woman marrying a redskin," one of the surveyors said, loud enough for those around him to hear. "It is against God. It is against nature." "It is a scandal," one of the townswomen whispered to her neighbor, fanning herself, though the day was not yet hot. "That poor addled girl, she must be desperate. What kind of woman would do such a thing?" May arrived in the buckboard. Old Ben was driving. Jamie bundled in a thick blanket on the seat beside him. May sat in the back, her mother's blue dress neat and clean. Her hair was brushed until it shone, pulled back from her face. She looked pale, but calm. She held her head high as she walked from the wagon to the church doors. Old Ben on one side, Jamie leaning heavily on her other. She did not look at the crowd. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Ash was already inside. He had not come with her. He had simply appeared at the church 5 minutes earlier, as if he had materialized from the earth itself. He was not wearing his buckskins. He was wearing a clean, dark cotton shirt and dark trousers, his black hair tied back with a simple leather thong. He looked, May thought with a strange, confusing jolt, civilized. But the long, pale scar on his cheek was a stark reminder of the wilderness. He stood at the front of the church, his back to the door, watching the minister. He looked completely, utterly out of place, and yet he seemed more solid than the building's foundation. The minister, Reverend Pike, was a nervous man. He had been lobbied heavily by Kincaid's men that morning,
and by the outraged townswomen, demanding he refuse. But he had also been visited by old Ben, who had quietly reminded him that the church's roof had been leaking for a year, and that a generous donation from a grateful citizen was forthcoming if he simply did his Christian duty. He looked at the packed pews. This was the largest congregation he had ever had. May walked down the short, dusty aisle, her hand gripping Jamie's. She sat Jamie in the front pew, where old Ben was already waiting. Then she turned and walked the last few steps to the front, standing beside Ashnez. She did not look at him. She looked at the simple wooden cross on the wall. Reverend Pike cleared his throat, his hands visibly shaking. We are gathered here today to join this man, Ashki Nez, and this woman, May Callahan, in holy matrimony. The air in the church was thick with tension. May could feel the hundreds of stares on her back, a physical, hateful pressure. She could feel the cold, unreadable presence of the man beside her. The minister rushed through the words, his voice stumbling over the text. When he got to the vows, he looked at May, his eyes begging her to make this quick. Do you, May Callahan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health? May's voice was a whisper, but in the silence, it carried, I do. He turned to Ash. And do you, Ashki Nez, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Ash did not answer immediately. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2. May felt a cold, prickling panic. Was he changing his mind? Was this some final, cruel test? Then, he turned his head, just slightly, and looked at her. It was the first time he had truly looked at her all day. His dark, unreadable eyes met hers. I do, he said. The voice was not a whisper. It was a low, steady, resonant sound that filled the small church, vibrating in the wooden beams. It was not the voice of a man signing a paper. It was not the voice of a man playing a game. It was the voice of a man making a vow. May's heart gave a painful, unsteady lurch. He was serious. He truly, genuinely meant it. Then by the power vested in me by this territory, Pike said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, I pronounce you man and wife. He looked desperately at Ash, then at May. You may kiss the bride. May froze. Her blood turned to ice. This was not part of the deal. This was not on paper. This was not business. She turned her head to look at him, her eyes wide with a new, fresh panic. This was a man she did not know, a man she had hired, a man she was, if she was honest, terrified of. Ash looked down at her. He was not a fool. He saw the raw fear in her eyes. He saw the rigid, terrified line of her shoulders. He saw the entire town staring, hungry for a mistake, hungry for a sign of fraud. He raised his hand. May flinched. She could not help it. She thought, for a wild second, that he might strike her. His hand was surprisingly gentle. He did not touch her face or her arm. He touched the side of her neck, just below her ear, his thumb resting lightly on her pulse. He could feel the frantic, terrified hammering of her blood. It was not a passionate kiss. It was not a romantic kiss. He leaned in, and his lips, dry and warm from the desert, pressed against hers. It was brief. It was firm. It was solid. It was, she thought with a dizzying, terrifying shock, a kiss of protection. It was a seal. It was a brand. He released her and stepped back, turning to face the crowd. For one long, silent moment, the world stopped. May stood there, her lips tingling, her pulse hammering under the place where his thumb had been. It was the first time she had felt safe since her father died, and that feeling terrified her more than anything. In the back pew, hidden by the shadows, a man had watched the entire proceeding. Silas Kincaid had not bothered to dress for church. He was smoking a thick cigar, in open violation of all rules.
but no one had dared to stop him. He watched the kiss, his lips twisted in a cold, humorless smile. "So, the little fool did it," he murmured to the empty air. "She hired herself a buck, a husband." He stood up, even before the minister had finished. He dropped his cigar on the wooden floor of the church and crushed it out with the heel of his polished, expensive boot. "Let her have her day," he whispered to himself, walking out of the church and into the bright sunlight. "The law's a funny thing. It can be twisted, and I am very, very good at twisting it." That evening, he met with Agent Crowley and Sheriff Boone in the back room of the saloon, the door locked. "She has committed fraud," Kincaid said, pouring them all a drink from his private bottle. "A marriage of convenience, a sham, to defraud the bank and the railroad. We will have it annulled, and we will have her, and her savage, arrested for it." Old Ben would not let them go straight home from the church. "Every wedding needs a celebration," he declared, shooing the gawkers away from the church doors. He led them, a strange little parade, to the saloon, which he had closed for the afternoon. Just him, May, Jamie, and Ash. He poured Jamie a tall glass of bright red lemonade and gave May and himself a small glass of whiskey. He offered one to Ash. Ash looked at the glass of amber liquid, then at Ben. "No," he said. He did not drink. He had seen what the white man's whiskey did to his people. He accepted a glass of water. It was a strange, quiet, and awkward party. Ben tried to be cheerful, telling old, dusty stories. Jamie, his eyes bright with fever and excitement, had forgotten his shyness. He looked at Ash with pure adoration. "Is your horse really that fast? Is it true you can track a man across solid rock? Can you teach me to shoot an arrow?" Ash watched the boy for a long moment, his usual coldness softening, just slightly. "Breathing first," he said, his voice low. "You cannot shoot if you cannot breathe. I will teach you to breathe." May sat and watched them. She watched this strange, scarred man, her husband, as he spoke patiently to her brother. She watched him as he stood near the saloon's front window, his body naturally angled toward the door, his eyes scanning the street, watching for trouble. He was awkward in this room, a predator in a cage, but he was present. When one of the drunken railroaders stumbled by, peered in the window, and yelled a slur, Ash did not even flinch. He just moved, subtly, to stand between the window and May. The line between the contract and the man was blurring. The man she had hired was a legal fiction, the man standing guard by the window. The one who had made her brother smile was terrifyingly real. The ride home was quiet. Ash rode his black horse, leading May's mare, Patience, who was tied to the back of the buckboard. Jamie had fallen asleep in May's lap, exhausted by the day, a small smile on his face. When they got to the cabin, the sun was setting. Ash unhitched the horse, watered it, and checked the flimsy perimeter fence, all with an efficient, silent economy of motion. May put Jamie to bed, pulling the blanket up to his chin. And then they were alone. The cabin was one room, one chair, one small table, and one bed. May's bed, her parents' bed. The silence was a thick, heavy, suffocating thing. May busied herself, checking the lock on the door, folding Jamie's clothes, her back to Ash, her body painfully tense. I will take the floor," she said, her voice sounding small and thin in the tiny room. "You can have the bed. You are the—" She could not say husband. She could not say guest. "I am not your guest," Ash said from the doorway. He was looking out at the dark, listening to the night sounds. "And I am not your husband. Not in that way. We will share the bed." "Share!" May's head snapped up, pure cold panic in her voice. "It is cold," he said, stating a simple fact. The sun had set,
and the desert night was already seeping its bone-deep chill through the thin wooden walls. "And there is one blanket. Go to sleep. You are safe from me." It was an order, not a request. May's hands were trembling so hard she could barely unbutton the back of her mother's dress. She did it with her back to him, her skin crawling with awareness. She climbed into the narrow bed, still in her underthings, and lay on the very, very edge of the mattress, her body rigid as a fence post, her back to the center of the bed. She heard him move. He did not undress. She could hear the sound of his boots being set on the floor, but nothing else. He lay down on the other side of the bed, on top of the covers, his back to her. He was a solid, warm, heavy weight on the mattress, and his presence seemed to suck all the air from the room. They lay there for what felt like hours, back to back, not touching, in a silence so loud it screamed. Sometime after midnight, the cold became unbearable. Despite the wool blanket, May began to shiver. It was a small, uncontrollable tremor at first, and then it seized her, her teeth chattering so hard she had to bite her lip to keep from making noise. She felt him move. She tensed, her eyes squeezed shut, her heart stopping. He did not turn. He simply reached back, his arm heavy, and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then, his large, warm body shifted, moving backward until his back was pressed firmly against hers. He was a wall of solid heat. "Go to sleep," he murmured, his voice thick with his own sleep. "You are cold." He was right. She was freezing, and he was warm. His warmth seeped through her thin chemise, through her skin, into her very bones. The shivering began to subside. She was lying in a bed with a Navajo warrior, a stranger, a man she had paid to be her husband. She was pressed against him, his back against hers, a single, thin layer of cotton between them. She could feel the steady, slow rise and fall of his breathing. She was overwhelmed with a confusing, warring storm of emotions, shame, fear, humiliation, and, beneath it all, a deep, profound, and utterly terrifying sense of safety. She did not move. He did not move. And in the darkness, both of them lay there, wide awake, pretending to be asleep. When May woke the next morning, the cabin was silent. A sliver of gray light cut through the gap in the curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For a disorienting second, she did not know where she was. The bed was too warm. She was lying in the middle of it, not perched on the edge, and the wool blanket was tucked securely around her shoulders. She turned her head. Ash was gone. She sat bolt upright, her heart hammering with a sudden, sharp panic. Had he left? Had he realized the folly of his promise, the true danger, and simply gone? She scrambled out of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold, rough planked floor. The cabin was empty. Jamie was still asleep, a small, still lump under his own blanket. She yanked the cabin door open. The rising sun was brilliant, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and pale pink. The air was cold and sharp. Ash was outside. He was not on his horse. He was standing by the corner of her cabin, one hand resting on the warped logs, his head tilted as if he were listening to the building itself. His back was to her. He was simply standing and watching the sun rise, as if he had been doing it in this exact spot for 1,000 years. May leaned against the doorframe, her legs weak with a relief so profound it made her dizzy. He had not left. He was still here. He had not just been watching the sun. When he finally turned, his face was set in the same impassive, business-like mask he had worn in the Hogan. "The mud in your chinking is rotten," he said, as if they were continuing a conversation. He gestured to the cracks in the logs. "The wind comes straight through. The boy's cough is worse in the morning because the night air is poisoning him." May, still wrapped in the fog of sleep and the memory of his warmth against her back, could only stare. I know, I was going to mix new mud, but "You did not have the time," he finished, not unkindly.
He walked past her, brushing by her in the narrow doorway without touching her, and went to the small hearth. He picked up the heavy iron kettle. The well is low. The water is half mud. I know, May said, a new, sharp defensiveness rising in her throat. It is a bad well. It has always been a bad well. It is a shallow well, he corrected. It was dug in the wrong place. Give me the shovel. For the next 3 days, the fragile, terrifying, an unspoken truce of their lives was drawn. Ash did not act like a guest. He did not act like a boarder. He acted like a man who had claimed a piece of ground, and he intended to hold it. He did not speak to her of the night in the bed. He did not touch her. In fact, he rarely spoke to her at all, except to issue short, flat commands. Where is the hammer? Boil water, all of it. Hold this beam, and do not move. He was, May realized with a sinking heart, not just her husband on paper. He was her husband. He had taken possession of the homestead as surely as if he had bought it. He moved her workbench, the one her father had built for her, from its place by the window. What are you doing? She cried out, as he dragged the heavy pine table to the cabin's darkest corner. I cannot see my mending there. I like it by the window. That is why it is moving, he said, not even pausing. You sat there yesterday for an hour. A man on the ridge with a good rifle could have taken your head off. What man? There was no man, she protested, her voice high and angry. She was losing control of her own home. You do not know that, he said, dropping the table with a thud. You will not sit by the window again. May was furious. She was used to making her own decisions, to surviving on her own terms. She had not fought off Silas Kincaid just to be ordered around by a new master. You have no right, she started. Ash turned on her, and his eyes, for a moment, were not cold. They were hot. I have the right, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I made a vow. This land, this cabin, you are my responsibility. I will not be a husband who watches his wife be shot because she likes the light. May's anger died, replaced by a cold, stinging shock. He was not angry because she had defied him. He was angry because she had been careless. He felt insulted. He felt, she realized, that she had put him in a position of failing his duty. She turned away, her face burning, and said nothing else. But where he was a figure of silent, demanding authority with May, he was something else entirely with Jamie. Jamie, who had been weak and listless for months, was suddenly, miraculously, alive. He followed Ash around the small yard like a pale shadow, his eyes wide with hero worship. Ash, in turn, treated the boy with a gruff, surprising patience, while May had always coddled Jamie, afraid a single wrong move would stop his fragile heart. Ash made him work. You want to know how to trap? Ash asked him, as he checked a snare line. Then you will learn to make the snare. Your hands are small. They are good for this. He sat with Jamie for an hour, showing him how to braid the sinew, how to tie the slip knot, how to feel for the right tension. May watched from the porch, her heart a confusing, aching knot. She saw her brother, his face a mask of concentration, his thin fingers slowly, clumsily, mimicking the warrior's scarred, powerful hands. I want a bow, Jamie announced one evening, his voice full of a new, shaky confidence. Like yours, I want to hunt. May was about to protest, to say it was too much, that he was not strong enough, but Ash spoke first. A bow is not a toy, he said, looking at Jamie. It is part of the world. It is life, and it is death. You are not strong enough to hunt, but you are strong enough to learn. He spent the next day finding the right piece of seasoned wood, and he and Jamie began to shape it, scraping it with a piece of broken glass. May was grateful, so deeply, profoundly grateful it hurt. Her brother had a light in his eyes she had not seen since their parents were alive, but there was a small, sharp, ugly splinter of jealousy, too. Jamie was her boy, her responsibility. And now, he looked at Ash as if he were the sun. He ran to Ash first in the morning. He saved his questions for Ash. He even started using the few Navajo words Ash taught him. Simple words for water and rabbit and quiet. She was, May realized with a pang, no longer the center of her brother's world. The small cabin, which had always felt empty and cold, was suddenly crowded. It was filled with the smell of his body, a scent of sage and horse and something uniquely male. It was filled with his tools, his silence, his demanding, protective presence. And in the evenings, the three of them would gather around the small fire. It was then that the sharp edges of the day began to blur. One night, May saw Ash pick up her father's old, leather-bound Bible. It was the only book in the cabin. He opened it, his expression unreadable, and stared at the pages. He was not reading. She realized. He was squinting at the letters, his finger tracing one of the headlines, his lips moving silently. He could speak English, perfectly, but he could not read it. Not well. "That word is Genesis," May said softly, from her side of the fire. He looked up, and for a second, she saw a flash of pure, defiant pride in his eyes. He was about to snap, to put the book down, to deny the weakness. "It is the first book," May said, her voice gentle, as if she were speaking to Jamie. "It means the beginning." He did not put the book down. He stared at her, his gaze intense. Then, he pointed one long, calloused finger at the word. "Show me." And so a new ritual began. After Jamie was asleep, May would light the good lamp, and they would sit at the table, their heads bent over the only book they had. It was a strange thing, teaching this man. He learned with a fierce, quick intelligence, the way he did everything. He did not want to know the stories. He wanted to know the words. He wanted to know how the sounds were captured in the ink. "This is a B," she would say, her own finger, clean from mending, pointing to the letter. "This is a G." His hand, rough and scarred, would cover hers, moving her finger to the next word. And this, the touch was accidental. It was instructive, but it sent a jolt through her every time. His skin was warm, his hand heavy. She would pull her own hand back quickly, her face flushing, and pretend to look for the next passage. In return, he taught her, but his lessons were not in the cabin. He took her outside, into the vast, clear desert night. "You look at the ground too much," he said, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "You will never survive if you do not see what is above you." He pointed to the sky. "There, the line of 3 stones in the sky. You follow them down, you find the bright star, the one that does not move. That is the North Star. As long as you can find that, you are never lost." They stood side by side in the cool, silent dark, a strange, married pair, staring at the heavens. Her arm brushed his. He did not move away. She did not move away. And for a moment, the world felt still, balanced, and right. This fragile, impossible peace was not meant to last. Silas Kincaid had been busy. In his private rail car, hundreds of miles away, he sat with a thin, pale man in an expensive suit. The man was his new lawyer, brought all the way from Santa Fe. "A marriage, you say?" the lawyer, Mr. Finch, asked, tapping his fingers together. "A legal marriage, registered with the territory." "A complete and utter sham," Silas Kincaid said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "She is a desperate girl. He is a local savage she hired to protect her. I have proof." "Proof? I have testimony," Kincaid said, smiling. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his desk. "Agent Crowley has been very helpful. He has sworn affidavits. One from a hotel clerk who will testify they took separate rooms on their wedding night in town. A lie, of course. They never stayed in town. But it sounds convincing." He pushed another paper across the desk.
And this one, from a man who worked for me? He will testify he overheard Miss Callahan tell his wife that she had only hired the Indian for one day, that it was a business deal to defraud the bank. This is excellent. Mr. Kincaid, the lawyer said, his eyes gleaming. This is more than enough. Fraud, conspiracy, contempt for the law, and the sanctity of marriage. The territorial judge in Prescott hates this kind of thing, especially when it involves, well, miscegenation. He will not just annul the marriage. He will throw them both in jail. And the land, of course, will revert to its contested status. The bank will foreclose. Good, Silas said, raising his glass. See to it. The bad news came on a bright, hot afternoon, 2 weeks after the wedding. May was outside, hanging her mended clothes on the line, when she saw the dust, a single rider. It was Sheriff Boone. He did not look happy. He looked, in fact, like a man on his way to his own hanging. He dismounted slowly, his eyes not meeting hers. Ash emerged from the cabin, sensing the change in the air, his hand resting lightly on the knife at his belt. Jamie peered from behind his leg. May, Boone mumbled, taking off his hat and twisting the brim in his big hands. Ash.
Sheriff,
May said, her heart turning to a cold, heavy stone.
What is it?
I have got some bad news, Boone said, his eyes on his boots. I have got a legal summons from the territorial court in Prescott. He held out the folded papers. May would not take them.
I do not understand,
she whispered. Ash stepped forward. His face was blank, but his eyes were like black ice. He took the papers from the sheriff's hand. He did not look at them. He just looked at Boone. What do they say? Ash asked, his voice flat. Boone swallowed. They say they are charging you, both of you, with fraud and conspiracy to defraud. They say your marriage is a sham, a lie, to get around the bank loan. You are both summoned to appear before the judge in Prescott in 3 days.
3 days?
May's voice was a thin squeak.
That is impossible. We are married. We are the Reverend Pike. We have the paper.
I am sorry, May, Boone said, his voice full of a genuine misery. Kincaid's lawyers have sworn statements, witnesses. They say they have proof you paid him. They say you were overheard saying it was just for 1 day. May's blood ran cold. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. 1 day, her own stupid, desperate words. She turned, her eyes wide with panic, and looked at Ash. His face was a mask. He was utterly, terrifyingly calm. He looked at Boone, his gaze so cold and flat that the sheriff took an involuntary step back. Get off this land, Ash said. Now, see here, I'm just doing my job. Get off this land, Ash repeated, his voice no louder, but with an edge that cut like a razor. Sheriff Boone did not argue. He mounted his horse and rode away, looking like a man who had just delivered a death sentence. The moment he was out of earshot, May's calm shattered.
They know,
she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth.
Oh, God, Ash, they know. This is all my fault, my words. They are using my own stupid words against us.
She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his hard muscle.
They will take the land. They will take it, and they will put you in jail. For me, for my plan, I am so sorry,
She was babbling, the panic rising, a hysterical sob building in her throat. Ash did not comfort her. He did not pat her shoulder. He did not say it would be all right. He simply took her wrist, his grip like a steel trap, and pulled her hand off his arm. He looked down at her, his face as hard and unforgiving as the desert rock. I told you, he said, his voice a low, cold fire. I told you this was not a one-day game. He turned away from her, his back rigid. You wanted your freedom, he said, not to her, but to the mountains in the distance. But you used my honor as a shield. Now the shield is being shot at.
The words struck her harder than a physical blow. They were cold, and they were true. He was not angry, he was just stating a fact. She had brought this on him. She had used his pride, his name, his people, as a tool, and now the tool was going to be broken. "You are right," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and bitter. I endangered you. I endangered your people. I am so sorry. Ash." He said nothing. He just walked to the edge of the property, to the failing fence, and stared out at the land he had just been ordered to leave. The day before they were due in court, the sky turned a sickly, yellowish-brown. The wind, which had been fitful all morning, died completely. The world fell into an oppressive, heavy silence. "A storm," Ash said, his voice flat. He was standing in the doorway, scanning the horizon. "A bad one. Get the animals in the shed. Bring in all the water you can." It hit them just after noon. It was not a rainstorm. It was a wall of red dust, a churning, howling mass of grit that blotted out the sun and turned the day to a suffocating, blood-red night. The wind shrieked, a high, thin sound like a woman screaming. It tore at the cabin, rattling the windows and finding every single crack in the log walls. They were prisoners. The cabin was a tiny, fragile ship in a red, howling sea. Jamie, terrified by the noise and the dark, coughed, the dust in the air irritating his weak lungs. May gave him a small dose of laudanum from her medicine chest, and he finally fell into a fitful, uneasy sleep on his cot. The hours passed. The storm did not relent. It grew worse. The wind sounded like a freight train, and the fine, gritty dust seeped in from everywhere, coating their teeth, their clothes, their hair. May sat on the floor, her back against the rough-hewn table, her arms wrapped around her knees. The lamp, its wick turned low, cast a small, flickering circle of light in the vast, roaring darkness. She was shaking. It was not from the cold. It was from a fear so deep it was in her bones. "I am afraid," she whispered. Her voice was so small she was not sure she had even said it, but in a lull in the wind. He heard her. Ash was on the other side of the room, near the door, a silent shadow. "Of the storm?" he asked. His voice was just a low rumble. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "Of tomorrow, of the judge, of losing." She looked up, her eyes huge and dark in the dim light, finding his, "I am afraid of losing this land, and I am afraid for Jamie. This will kill him." She paused, and the last, most difficult admission was torn from her. And I am afraid of them taking you, putting you in a cell. I could not bear that." He was silent for a long moment. The wind howled, filling the space between them. Then he moved. He crossed the small room in 2 strides and sat on the floor, not next to her, but in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "I am not easily taken," he said, his voice quiet. "They will lie," she whispered, the tears starting to fall, hot and gritty on her dusty cheeks. "Kincaid will lie. His witnesses will lie, and the judge will believe him, because he is rich, and I am poor, and you are you." He looked at her, his face unreadable in the flickering, uncertain light. "You have me," he said. It was not a comfort. It was a statement of fact, as simple and unmovable as the mountains. "I know," she said, her voice choking on a sob. "That is what scares me. I have you, and I have used you. I am so sorry. Ash, I am so sorry I did this to you." He watched her, his gaze intense. He reached out, not his whole hand, but one long, calloused finger, and very gently, he touched her cheek, catching a tear on his skin. He looked at the wet, muddy track. "Do not be," he murmured. The touch was a spark in a tinder dry forest. She leaned into it, a small, involuntary, desperate movement. Her eyes were fixed on his. His gaze searched her face, as if he were seeing her for the first time. He saw the fear, and the guilt, and the exhaustion, and he saw the strength that had brought her to his hogan. He leaned in, very slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. His lips met hers. It was not the chaste, public kiss from the church, and it was not the gentle touch he had given her in his hogan. This was something else. This was a kiss born of the storm, a kiss that tasted of dust and salt and fear. It was slow, and it was deep. It was a kiss of shared desperation, of two people clinging to the only solid thing in a world that was tearing itself apart. It was a question, and it was an answer. May's hands, which had been clenched in her lap, came up. She did not push him away. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her knuckles white, holding on to him as if he were the only thing keeping her from being blown away. The kiss deepened, his other hand coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her gritty, undone hair. It was not gentle. It was hungry, and it was raw. It was the anger from the last 2 weeks. It was the fear of the next day. It was the desperate, unspoken loneliness of two people who had been alone for too long. He was the one who broke it. He pulled back, his breathing as ragged as the wind outside. His forehead rested against hers. His eyes closed. He was shaking. "Ash," she whispered, her voice broken, her own body trembling. He pulled back further, putting a few inches of necessary, painful space between them. His eyes were open, and they were dark, a stormy, confusing mix of desire and a deep, profound anger at the situation, at the world. "Not now," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "Not like this." He stood up, an abrupt, violent motion that left her feeling cold and abandoned on the floor. He went to the small, grimy window, rubbing a clear spot with his thumb, and stared out at the red-black chaos. "This storm will end," he said, his back to her. "And tomorrow, we will go to the court." He paused, his shoulders rigid. "We will talk about this," he said, the "this" hanging in the air, full of the taste of their kiss. "If we survive tomorrow." May was left alone on the floor, her lips burning, her body aching, her heart a wild, confused, terrified thing. The love she had been denying, the fear she had been swallowing. It was all there, raw and exposed, and it was all suspended, hanging by the most fragile of threads, waiting for the judgment of the morning. The storm had passed as if it had never been, leaving the world scoured and painfully bright. The air was clean, sharp, and cold. The sky was an unforgiving, brilliant blue. The silence that hung between May and Ash in the buckboard on the way to town was heavier than the storm had been. They had not spoken of the kiss. They had not spoken of the trial. They had simply moved. A grim, silent partnership. He had fed the horses. She had bundled Jamie, his small face pale and pinched with a new, quiet fear, and taken him to old Ben's. Ben had met them at the saloon's back door, his face grim. "You leave him here," old Ben had said, his voice a low rumble. "This ain't no place for a child. I will keep him safe in the back room. You go fight. May, you go fight." The district court was being held in the town hall, a single oversized room that smelled of stale tobacco, floor wax, and the sweat of nervous men. The judge, a man named Harlan, had ridden in from Prescott, and the entire town of Coyote Bend had turned out as if for a circus. The room was packed, hot, and suffocating. Every seat was taken. Men stood 3 deep against the back wall, their hats in their hands. May and Ash walked in, and the loud buzz of conversation died instantly, replaced by a thick, heavy, watching silence. May felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, stripping her bare. She wore the blue dress, the only one she had, and she had brushed her hair until her scalp ached. Ash walked beside her. He was not a man walking to his own execution.
He moved with the same fluid, unnerving grace he always did, as if the room and the people in it were nothing more than a slight inconvenience, a stand of trees to be navigated. He was clean, his hair tied back, his scarred face impassive. He was a mountain, and the room was just a valley. They were directed to a small, scarred wooden table at the front. A thin, pale man in a city suit, Kincaid's lawyer, Mr. Finch, was already seated at the opposing table, organizing a tall stack of papers. Those papers were the physical wall between May and Ash. They sat, May's hands clenched in her lap, Ash staring at the American flag hanging limply on the wall behind the judge's bench. The gavel cracked, and the proceedings began. Silas Kincaid was the first to testify, though it was more of a performance. He was dressed in his finest black suit, his voice smooth, reasonable, and full of a deep, false sorrow. He stood before the court, a pillar of civic duty. "Your Honor," he said, his voice resin-basicating with false sincerity, "I am not a vindictive man. I am a man of progress. I believe in the future of this territory, and I believe," he paused, smiling warmly, "in love, but I also believe in the law." He gestured to May, a look of profound pity on his face. "This young woman, Miss Callahan, has been through a great deal. We all feel for her, but the law cannot be mocked. It cannot be used as a tool of fraud, to deceive honest businessmen and to block the progress of this great nation's railroad." He then looked at Ash. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by a look of cold, clinical disgust. And to see the holy institution of marriage, the sacred bond between a man and a woman, twisted, used in such a way, and by such an arrangement. He did not have to say the words interracial marriage. His tone, his look, his small, satisfied sneer said it all. "It is wrong. It is a perversion of God's law and man's. I am here to protect the community." He sat down to a murmur of approval from the men he employed in the crowd. Then, "Mr. Finch stood up. He was a snake, all quiet hisses and small, precise movements. He did not bluster. He simply, methodically, began to kill them. He called Agent Crowley to the stand. Crowley, sweating in his wool suit, took the oath. "Agent Crowley," Finch said, "you are familiar with the defendant, Mr. Nez." "Oh, yes," Crowley said, wiping his upper lip. "He is well known to my office. A difficult case." "In what way?" "He is an opportunist, sir," Crowley said, his voice rising with confidence. "He has a history of transactions. He sold his services to the army as a scout, against the wishes of his own elders. He works for coin. He is not," Crowley scoffed, "a man of traditional loyalties. He is loyal only to himself." He produced Ash's scouting papers, the very ones Ash had retrieved, and Finch entered them as evidence. "Exhibit A, Your Honor, proof that the defendant, Nez, has a history of selling his services to the white community. This was not a marriage. It was a purchase." Ash's expression did not flicker, but May saw his hands, resting on his knees, clench slowly, his knuckles turning white. Finch called his next witness, a thin, nervous-looking man named Sled, one of Kincaid's surveyors. He was, May realized with a jolt of sickness, the man Ash had shot in the shoulder on the road. He had recovered, and now he was here for his revenge. Sled, his arm in a sling he clearly no longer needed, swore on the Bible, his eyes avoiding May's. "Mr. Sled," Finch said, "did you have occasion to be near the Callahan homestead some weeks ago?" "I did," Sled said, his voice a low, rehearsed monotone. "I was checking survey lines for Mr. Kincaid." "And did you overhear a conversation?" "I did. I was near the cabin. I heard the defendant, Miss Callahan. I heard her plain as day. She was talking to her brother. She said—" He took a breath. "She said, I just hired him for one day.
She said she was going to pay the Indian to be her husband just long enough to fool the bank.
No, May's voice was a choked gasp. It was a lie, a terrible, twisted lie, spun from the fibers of her own worst, most desperate thoughts. But she had never said it.
Quiet, Judge Harlan banged his gavel. You will have your turn. Madam.
May sank back into her chair, her face burning, her stomach cold. She looked at Ash. His face was stone. He was looking at Sled with a cold, flat, assessing gaze. The look of a man marking a target.
And now, Finch said, his voice dripping with false sympathy,
I must call Mrs. May Nez to the stand.
Her legs felt like water. She had to grip the table to stand. She walked the few feet to the witness box, a small, railed-in chair, and sat. She felt like an animal in a cage. She took the oath, her voice a dry whisper. Finch smiled at her. It was the smile of a spider.
Mrs. Nez, he said, the name an insult.
Let us be clear. You were facing foreclosure. The bank was set to seize your land on a Tuesday, was it not?
Yes.
And on the Monday, the day before that seizure, you married this man, correct?
Yes.
A man you had barely spoken to, a man from a completely different world, a man you had met only, shall we say, in passing on the road?
May began.
He helped me. He helped you, Finch repeated, savoring the word. How convenient. And now you are here, your land safe, your brother secure. All thanks to this convenient marriage. He paced, letting the silence hang. Then he turned, his pale eyes pinning her. Just one final question, Mrs. Nez, a simple one, for the court. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, intimate whisper that everyone in the room could hear. Do you love your husband? The room, which had been so hot and loud, was suddenly, utterly, icily silent. May froze. The question was a trap, a steel-jawed, brutal trap, and she had walked right into it. She could feel Ash's gaze on her, heavy, unreadable. She could feel Kincaid's smile. She could feel the storm-driven kiss, a burning, gritty memory on her lips. If she said no, it was over. She would be admitting to fraud. They would be arrested. If she said yes, what was she saying? Was she lying to the court? Was she lying to herself? Was she lying to him? Was this desperate, terrifying, protective, and confusing feeling? Was it love to say yes felt like the cheapest, most hollow lie of all? A betrayal of the complex, dangerous, unspoken thing that had grown between them in the dark. She stammered. She looked at Ash, her eyes pleading for an answer he could not give. His face was stone, but his eyes were locked on hers, and they were not cold. They were watching, waiting. He is a good man, she whispered, her voice choking. He protects us. I respect him. That is not what I asked, Madam, Finch snapped. The kindness gone. I did not ask if you respect him. I did not ask if he is useful. I asked if you love him. Is this a marriage of the heart or a marriage of the land registry? Answer the question. May could not. The hot, stinging tears she had sworn she would not shed filled her eyes, blurring the courtroom, blurring the lawyer's hateful face. She opened her mouth, but only a small, choked sob came out. Please, I cannot. No further questions, Your Honor, Finch said, turning away in triumph. She has answered. May was a broken woman. She had failed. Your Honor, Finch said, addressing the judge. The evidence is clear. The testimony is unrefuted. The defendant herself cannot even profess affection. This is a clear case of fraud. I move for summary judgment. Judge Harlan nodded, looking satisfied. He picked up his gavel, ready to rule. Wait. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a hunting knife. It was Ash. He was on his feet. "Mr. Nez, you are out of order," the judge barked. "Sit down." Ash did not sit. He did not move to the witness stand. He simply walked to the open space in the center of the room, standing between May and the judge, between Kincaid and the town. He turned, not to the judge, but to the packed room. "You brought me here," he said, his English slow, precise, and cold. "You will listen." The room was so quiet, May could hear the sound of a fly buzzing against the hot glass of the window. "The lawyer asks if she loves me," Ash said. "That is not his business. He asks if I was paid. I was not." He turned his gaze on Judge Harlan. And the judge, a man of considerable power, actually seemed to shrink in his chair. "I will tell you why I did this. I watched this woman from the hills. I watched her try to mend a fence that was dead. I watched her fight for her land. I watched her fight for her sick brother. She lives by a creek where my own people, the Dine, sometimes take their children to drink. She has never chased them away. She has never poisoned the water." His gaze slid, cold and lethal, to Silas Kincaid, not like some... He turned back to the room. "The lawyer for the railroad says I am an opportunist. He is right. I saw an opportunity. Not for money. I saw a woman who was fighting the same snake that has been trying to bite my people for 100 years. I saw a woman who deserved to have someone stand beside her in that fight." He looked, finally, at May. Her tears had stopped. She was staring at him. Her heart stopped. "I did not marry her for money," Ash said, his voice ringing with a cold, hard truth that no one in the room could doubt. "I married her because her fight is also my fight. Her land is my land, and I will not," his voice dropped, a low, deadly promise, "let you take it." The silence was absolute. He had not confessed to fraud. He had confessed to an alliance. He had given her back her dignity. He had given himself dignity. Before the judge could recover, before Finch could object, another voice yelled from the back of the room. "And he is telling the truth, and I will be damned if I let you railroad him for it." Old Ben Harper pushed his way through the crowd, his face red with righteous fury. "Ben Harper, you are out of order," the judge bellowed. "I do not care about order. Harlan," Ben shouted, stabbing a finger at the judge. "I am a citizen of this town, and I will be heard. You are all listening to this snake," he pointed at Finch. "And this devil," he pointed at Kincaid. "Well, I am here to offer a different testimony." "Objection!" Finch screamed. "This is not a witness." "I am a witness to your boss," Ben roared. "I am a witness to Silas Kincaid. I heard him in my own saloon, not 2 weeks ago, drunk on his own expensive brandy. Laughing about this very day, he bragged to his men, he said, and I quote him, 'This whole trial is a legal charade,' he said." Ben's voice rose to fill every corner of the room. "That he had the judge in his pocket, and that the law was just a tool to swat flies." The room exploded. It was not a murmur, it was a roar. Everyone turned to stare at Judge Harlan, whose face had gone from red to a sickly, pale white. Kincaid was on his feet, his face a mask of black rage. "This is slander. This is contempt." Sheriff Boone, standing in the back, looked at the floor, his face crimson with a shame so deep it was painful to see. Ben had just said what they all knew. Judge Harlan was trapped. He was exposed. His corruption laid bare for the entire town to see. He grabbed his gavel and pounded it, not with authority, but with the frantic, panicked energy of a cornered rat. "Silence! Silence in this court!" he shrieked. Silas Kincaid did not wait for the ink to dry on the judge's order. He did not wait for the appeal. The morning after the trial, a train of 20 wagons, loaded with lumber, tools, and rough-looking men, rolled onto May's land. The temporary work camp was a brutal, swift occupation. They did not build on a respectful corner of the property. They built in the center, not 50 yards from May's cabin. They felled the few shade trees her father had protected.
They drove their mules and heavy wagons through her meager, failing corn patch, churning the soil, and they began to dig. Not a well, but a massive, ugly ditch to reroute the small creek, fouling the water downstream with mud and debris. May and Ash watched from their porch, two silent, trapped figures. Jamie, his face pale with fear, hid behind May's skirts.
"They are on our land,"
May whispered, her voice shaking with a cold, helpless rage.
"He is just taking it." "He is not just taking it,"
Ash said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He was watching the stream, his gaze fixed on the muddy water.
"He is provoking."
He was right. The stream, fouled by Kincaid's men, was the same one that ran down into the canyons, the one that provided water not just for her, but for the Navajo grazing grounds nearby. The next day, the provocation became a direct assault. Naomi rode to the cabin, her face a mask of fury. She did not dismount.
"Ashki,"
she called, her voice sharp. "He has put guards on the water." Ash was at her side in an instant. "What guards?"
"Railroad men,
with rifles," Naomi said, her hands clenching her reins. "They let the white ranchers water their cattle, but when our women came with their jars, they pointed their guns. They said the water was Kincaid property. They said the savages could drink in the desert." May, standing on the porch, felt her blood run cold. This was not about the land anymore. This was about starting a war. Ash's face was unreadable, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. He went to the shed, his movements economical and precise. He returned not with his bow, but with his Winchester rifle, the one he had earned from the soldiers.
"Ash, no!"
May ran to him, grabbing his arm.
"That is what he wants. He wants you to fight. He wants you to give him an excuse to call the soldiers back, to say you are a renegade."
"If a man points a gun at my family," Ash said, his voice flat, his dark eyes fixed on the camp, "he must be prepared to use it. If our women cannot drink, we are already at war."
"Think of Jamie,"
she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Think of the children in your own camp. They need peace. Your sister's children. Naomi's.
You cannot start this. Please, Ash, not like this."
He looked at her, his gaze locked on her pleading, terrified eyes. He was a man caught between two worlds, two duties. He was a warrior of the Dine, and he was a husband. His tribe, his elders, his own history, screamed for him to ride down to that creek and end this. His wife, the woman who had stood by him in court, was begging him to be something else. The struggle was a physical thing, a storm in his eyes. He looked at May's hand on his arm, and then he looked at the rifle. Slowly, his fingers loosened their grip on the wooden stock. "Not today," he said, his voice a low rasp. But the decision cost him. He turned and walked into the desert, away from her, away from his rifle, to be alone. May was left on the porch, shaking. She had won, for now. But she had also seen the price. She had asked a man of honor to swallow his pride, and she did not know if their fragile bond could survive it. The tension on the homestead was a living thing. For 3 days, the land was a coiled snake. Kincaid's men were loud, their hammers ringing all day, their drunken shouts and laughter filling the night. The Navajo were a silent, watchful presence on the ridges, their anger a palpable, gathering storm. Ash was a ghost. He patrolled the edges of the property, a silent, armed guard, but he barely spoke to May. The man who had kissed her in the storm was gone, replaced by the cold, dutiful soldier. Then, on the 4th night, the land exploded. May was jolted from a light, restless sleep by a sound that was not thunder. It was a deep, whooping cough, followed by a scream. "Fire!" She leaped from the bed. Ash was already at the door, pulling it open. The night was not dark. It was a terrifying, flickering orange. Kincaid's half-built supply camp was a roaring inferno. The framework of the new depot was a skeleton of black timbers against a wall of flame.
Ash, my God.
As she spoke, a second, more violent explosion tore the night apart. A stack of barrels, likely containing kerosene or black powder, went up in a massive, churning fireball that lit the countryside for miles. The concussion wave hit the cabin, rattling the windows in their frames and knocking Jamie's cup from the table. "Get down!" Ash yelled, pulling her to the floor. They watched from the doorway. Two small figures against a backdrop of hell. The fire was massive, consuming the lumber, the tools, the wagons, everything.
Who did this?
May whispered, horrified. Ash's face was grim in the flickering light.
Who do you think they will say did this?
He did not have to wait long for an answer. Within the hour, they heard the riders. Not one or two, but a posse, thundering from the direction of town. Sheriff Boone was at their door, his face streaked with soot and a terrible, weary shame. Behind him were not just his deputies, but 6 of Kincaid's men, their faces hard and triumphant in the firelight, their rifles held ready.
May, Ash,
Boone said, his voice heavy. He would not meet their eyes. "I am placing you both under arrest."
Arrest!
May's voice was a thin squeak.
For what? We were here. We have been here all night.
"I am sorry, May," Boone said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Mister, Kincaid's camp is destroyed. He is claiming it was a planned attack. Retaliation for the court case."
That is a lie,
May cried.
Silas did this. He must have. He did it to frame us.
"I cannot prove that," Boone said, his voice breaking just a little. "And he has a witness, one of his men. He was on guard. He says he saw Ash. He says he saw him near the camp, with a torch, not 10 minutes before the first explosion."
He is a liar.
Ash's voice was a low growl. He had not moved from the doorway, but his body was coiled. A spring pulled to its breaking point. "It does not matter," Boone said, finally looking up, his face a mask of misery. He unclipped the set of manacles from his belt. "I have a sworn statement. I have to take you in." "No." It was the only word Ash said.
Son,
Boone pleaded.
do not make this harder. Do not make me.
Ash moved. He did not move toward Boone. He moved like a shadow, a blur of speed. He grabbed May, pulling her back into the dark of the cabin. He slammed the heavy wooden door, and in the same motion, dropped the thick crossbar into place. A rifle bullet splintered the wood of the door. Not a second later. "He is resisting," one of Kincaid's men yelled. "He is armed. Light them up." A hail of gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the thin wooden walls of the cabin. "Get Jamie! Get him under the bed!" Ash yelled, shoving May toward the back of the room. He grabbed his own rifle from the wall. The back wall of the cabin was still dark, facing the open desert.
Ash, what are you doing?
May shrieked, crawling on the floor, the sound of bullets splintering the air around her. "They are not taking me," he said, his voice a deadly calm. He kicked at the back wall, at a loose plank near the floor he had noted days before. "They want a savage. They will get one, but they will not get me in a cage." He kicked the plank out, creating a dark, narrow opening. "You, Jamie," he commanded. "Go, now. Crawl to the shed. Get the horses."
What about you?
May sobbed, grabbing Jamie. "I will keep them busy at the front," he said. He looked at her, his face a hard, grim mask in the shadows. "Listen to me, Naomi. Go to Naomi. She will hide you. She will protect the boy. That is your only duty now. Protect the boy. Go." "I will not leave you." "Go!" he roared, and he shoved her, hard, toward the opening. He fired his rifle through the front window, and the return fire was immediate, a dozen guns concentrating on the front of the cabin. May, dragging a terrified, sobbing Jamie, crawled through the opening and into the cold, dark desert, the sound of the gun battle raging behind her. As she reached the relative safety of the shed, She saw Naomi, who must have seen the fire from the hills. She was on her horse, her face a mask of terror.
What is happening? They are trying to kill him,
May screamed. Just then, the front door of the cabin exploded open. Ash burst out, not running, but firing. He shot at the men, not to kill, but to scatter them. And then he leaped onto the back of his own black horse, which had been tethered nearby. "He is running!" a man yelled.
"Do not let him get away," Kincaid's voice, from somewhere in the darkness. "He is the living proof I want him, dead or alive."
Ash wheeled his horse, not toward the town, not toward the shed where May was, but toward the deep desert, toward the high, impassable canyons. It was a diversion. He was pulling the entire posse, all 8 or 9 men, away from her, away from Jamie. He dug his heels in, and the black horse leaped forward, vanishing into the night. The posse, a thundering, yelling mass of men, went right after him.
"We must go,"
Naomi said, her voice shaking.
"He did that for us. We must take the boy and ride."
"Where?" May asked, her mind numb, as she lifted Jamie onto Naomi's horse.
"To the high caves, a place they will never find. Come, we must not waste his sacrifice."
They rode for 2 hours, Naomi leading May's mare, patience, pushing through the darkness, through a landscape May did not recognize. Jamie had fallen into a terrified, exhausted silence, clinging to Naomi's back. They finally stopped in a high, sheltered arroyo, miles from the homestead. The sound of the gunfire was long gone. "We will rest here until morning," Naomi said, her voice hollow. May was not listening. She was staring back in the direction they had come.
"They were shooting at him," she whispered. "So many of them."
"He is Ashki," Naomi said, trying to sound brave, but her voice wavered. "He knows the canyons better than they know their own faces. He will lose them."
"But they were shooting,"
May repeated. She was back in that moment, seeing him ride into the dark.
"Naomi, I heard him. He grunted, just before he turned the horse. I think he was hit."
Naomi looked at her, her face pale in the moonlight.
"Do not say that."
"He was hit," May said, the certainty a cold, sick stone in her stomach. "He is out there, in the dark, wounded, and 9 men are hunting him. Kincaid wants him dead. He said, 'Living proof.' They will not stop until they have him. They will kill him, and they will bring his body back to town as proof that the Navajo attacked them."
"We cannot help him,"
Naomi said, her voice pleading.
"We must protect the boy. Ash gave us a duty."
May looked at Jamie, who was now asleep, his face tear-streaked, against Naomi's back. She thought of her duty to her brother, and then she thought of the man who had kissed her in the storm, the man who had stood for her in court, the man who had just ridden into a hail of bullets to save her. She swung herself off Patience, her movements stiff.
"What are you doing?"
Naomi asked, her voice sharp with alarm. "My duty is to my brother," May said, her voice quiet, but with a new, cold hardness that sounded almost like Ash. "And he is safe with you. You can get him to the caves."
"May, no, you cannot go back. They will kill you."
May walked to Naomi and put her hand on Jamie's sleeping head. "You are right. Ash gave me a duty. He told me to protect the boy." She looked up, and her eyes, in the pale moonlight, were burning. "But I had a vow before that. I am his wife."
"May, that was a paper."
"Was it?" May said, her voice low and fierce. "It was not a paper in the court. It was not a paper last night, and it is not a paper now. He is my husband. He is out there, wounded, and they are hunting him. I will not hide in a cave while he dies for me." She turned and walked back to her own horse. "If I abandon him now," May said, her hand on the saddle, her voice ringing with a terrible, clear conviction,
"then I deserve to lose everything. The land, Jamie, everything. They will kill him,"
Naomi sobbed.
"Not if I stop them,"
May said. She swung herself into the saddle.
Take Jamie to your people. Keep him safe. Tell him I love him." "Where are you going?" Naomi cried. "I am going to find Sheriff Boone," May said, her voice cold as steel. "And I am going to make him see the truth." She turned Patience and dug her heels in, riding not for the high caves, but back toward the valley, back toward the fire, back toward the war. As May rode, a different kind of gathering was happening. Kincaid, having returned from the chase empty-handed, Ash had vanished into the labyrinth of the canyons, was not defeated. He was enraged. He rode into his burning, ruined camp, and his men, a mix of railroad surveyors, deputies, and hired guns, gathered around him. "He is gone," one of the deputies said, sounding almost relieved. "He is not gone," Kincaid snarled, his face a mask of fury in the firelight. "He is hiding. He is back with the others, the whole filthy tribe. This was not the work of one man. This was an attack, an act of war." He wheeled his horse, his voice rising to a roar. "They burned us out. They tried to kill us in our beds. And what does the law do? It lets them run. Well, I am not the law. I am a citizen, defending my property." He pointed to the red glow of the fire, reflecting off the high canyon walls in the distance. "They are in there, hiding, laughing at us. Well, they will not laugh for long. We are going in. We are going to find Ashnez, and we are going to find every warrior who helped him, and we are going to burn them out, just as they did to us. It is self-defense." A low, bloodthirsty cheer went up from his men. Meanwhile, on the other side of the valley, May and Naomi raced against the coming dawn. Two separate women with two separate, desperate missions. Naomi, carrying Jamie, rode for the hidden caves to protect the children. May, her heart a cold stone of dread, rode for the main Navajo camp. She had to warn them. Kincaid was not hunting one man. He was hunting a people. And in a dark, narrow slot canyon, miles from either of them, a man leaned heavily against a rock, his hand pressed to his side. The front of his shirt was wet and dark in the moonlight. Ashnez pulled a ragged breath through his teeth, the pain a bright, hot fire. He had been hit, he was wounded, and he was alone. He looked at the moon. High overhead, he could hear, faintly, the sound of Kincaid's men, shouting in the valley below. They were gathering. He knew what was coming. He gritted his teeth, pushed himself off the rock, and began the long, painful climb up the canyon wall, back toward his people. The final battle was coming, and he would not meet it hiding in a hole. The dawn was a cold, gray smear in the east. Silas Kincaid, his face black with soot and rage, led his men toward the canyons. He was not a fool. He was not leading a cavalry charge. He was leading a hunting party. And he had the best tracker in the territory, Agent Crowley, who was now bound not by greed, but by a cold, shared fear. "He will head for the high ground," Crowley said, his voice a nervous, reedy sound in the cold air. "To the place they call the Red Spire. It is a box canyon. We can trap him there. Trap all of them." "Good," Silas snarled. "Lead the way." They rode, a grim party of 12 men, heavily armed, into the mouth of the canyon system. They did not know that Ash was watching them. He was not in the high ground. He was below them, in a narrow, shadowed cleft of rock, his side a solid, burning agony. He had stanched the bleeding with a handful of spider webs and a tight strip of his own shirt, but he was weak. He had lost too much blood. He watched them ride past, one by one. He had to lead them away from the main camp, where Naomi would have taken the women and children. He had to lead them away from May. He waited until the last man, a nervous-looking deputy, had passed his hiding spot. Then, Ash stepped out and fired his Winchester. The shot, from a high-powered rifle in a narrow canyon, was deafening. The bullet, fired not at the man, but at the rock face an inch from his head, sent a spray of stone chips stinging into the deputy's face. The man screamed, and his horse reared. "He is here!" the man shrieked, firing wildly into the shadows. "He is behind us!" "He is in the rocks!" Kincaid roared. "Spread out, hunt him down. $10 for the man who brings me his head." The canyon erupted into chaos. The posse, which had been an organized hunting party, dissolved into a terrified mob. They were shooting at shadows, their bullets whining and ricocheting off the canyon walls. The noise an insane, echoing thunder. This was exactly what Ash had wanted. He did not fire again. He melted back into the shadows, a wounded ghost, moving deeper into the labyrinth. He was leading them into a trap, a place he called the Needle's Eye, a narrow, twisting slot canyon where a single rifle could hold off an army. He just had to make it there before he bled out. He ran, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, his hand pressed to his side. He could hear them behind him, crashing through the brush, yelling, firing at anything that moved. He reached the narrow opening, a split in the rock barely wide enough for a horse. He squeezed through and took his position on a small ledge 20 feet above the canyon floor. He laid his rifle on the rock, his hands shaking, not with fear, but with blood loss. He had 6 bullets left. "Here I am, you sons of white ghosts," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp, as the first of Kincaid's men charged into the narrow passage. He fired. At that exact moment, a second, altogether different party was approaching the mouth of the main canyon. May had not ridden for Sheriff Boone. She knew he was with Kincaid. She had ridden like a mad woman to Old Ben's. She had burst into the saloon, her face wild, her dress torn, her knuckles bleeding from her ride. "He is wounded," she had gasped, shaking the old man by the shoulders. "Kincaid is hunting him. They will kill him." Ben had not needed any more. The look on her face was enough. He had pulled his shotgun from under the bar. "Boone is a fool," he had growled. "But he is not a murderer. Not yet." They had gone to the sheriff's office, Ben's shotgun held easily in his arms. Sheriff Boone was not there, but his chief deputy was. "Where is he?" Ben demanded. Out at the Kincaid fire," the deputy stammered, his eyes wide at the sight of May. "Get your horse," May said, her voice a cold, hard command that surprised them both. "You are coming with us, or so help me. I will tell the town you were part of this." The tide in Coyote Bend had turned. The story of the trial, of Ben's accusation, had spread. People were no longer just curious. They were angry. When May and Ben rode to the main street, 2 ranchers who had been at the trial, the ones who knew the Navajo were not to blame, joined them. Then Naomi, who had hidden Jamie in the caves and returned, a rifle across her lap, met them at the edge of town. And May had one more thing. In her desperate, frantic ride back, she had passed the burning, smoldering ruin of Kincaid's camp, and she had seen it. A small, white corner of paper, tucked under a half-burned log, missed by the flames. She had grabbed it. It was a contract, a piece of paper, signed by Silas Kincaid himself, agreeing to pay 3 men, the same 3 who had attacked her on the road, a sum of $500 for the clearing and removal of assets from his own camp. He had hired them to burn his own property. Now, this strange, desperate posse, May, Old Ben, Naomi, 2 ranchers, and a terrified deputy was riding hard, and as they approached the canyons, they found Sheriff Boone. He was sitting on his horse, a mile from the sound of the gunfire, his face in his hands. "Sheriff," May said, her voice cold. Boone looked up, his face a mask of gray misery. I told them to wait," he whispered. He resisted. They started shooting. I could not stop them." "He is in there," May said, pointing to the canyon, where the flat, rapid cracks of gunfire were echoing. "Kincaid is trying to murder him, right now." "I cannot," Boone stammered. "Kincaid has the law on his side. He is defending his property." May rode her horse right up to his, her face inches from his. "Is he?" she said, and she shoved the half-burned, mud-stained contract into his chest. "Read it." Boone fumbled with the paper.
his eyes scanning the words in the gray dawn light. He read it once. He read it twice. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale white.
He burned it himself,
Boone whispered, the words catching in his throat. It was all a lie. The fire, the attack, all of it. Yes, May said, her voice hard as iron. And you let him. Now, you are going to fix it. Get on your horse. Sheriff, we are ending this. The gunfire had become sporadic. Ash had made his stand. The narrow pass of the Needle's Eye was littered with 3 of Kincaid's men, wounded and moaning, their horses gone. Ash was a phantom, his shots coming from a different place every time. He is just one man, Silas Kincaid screamed, his voice echoing in the canyon. He was hiding behind a massive boulder, his fine suit torn, his face a mask of furious sweat. Rush him, I want him dead! You go, one of his men yelled back, clutching a bleeding arm. He is a devil! Ash was down to his last 2 bullets. He was weak, his vision starting to blur at the edges. The wound in his side was a hot, searing fire. He knew he had to move, to find a new position. He pushed himself up, but his leg, slick with his own blood, slipped on the rock. He stumbled, falling from his ledge, crashing 10 feet to the canyon floor below. He landed hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. His rifle skittered away, landing just out of his reach. The canyon went silent. One of Kincaid's men, the hired gun who had been at the trial, Sled, peeked out from behind his rock. He saw Ash, on his knees, unarmed, struggling to breathe. Sled smiled. I see him, he yelled. He is down. He is mine. He stepped out into the open, raising his rifle, taking his time, savoring the moment. He aimed, not at Ash's head, but at his chest. A single shot cracked the canyon's silence. Sled stiffened, a look of pure, stupid surprise on his face. He looked down at his own chest, where a new, dark hole had appeared. He fell, his rifle clattering on the rocks. Ash looked up, his vision swimming. At the end of the canyon, standing in the bright morning light, was May. Her father's old, heavy Colt was in her hand, smoking. Behind her stood Sheriff Boone, Old Ben, Naomi, and the others, their guns all raised, all pointed at Silas Kincaid. It is over, Kincaid, Boone yelled, his voice ringing with a new, raw authority. Drop your weapons. You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of Ash Nez. Kincaid was trapped. His remaining men, seeing the sheriff, seeing the new guns, threw their own rifles down instantly. It was not me, one of them yelled, his hands high. It was him. It was all Kincaid. He paid us. We will testify. Traitors, Silas shrieked, his voice a high, thin sound. He looked at May, who was now running forward, stumbling on the rocks, toward Ash. He saw Ash, on his knees, wounded, his head down. Kincaid saw his last, desperate chance. He grabbed his revolver from his belt and lunged, not at Boone, but at May. He grabbed her, pulling her in front of him, the muzzle of his gun jammed into her temple. So, get back, he screamed, his eyes wild. All of you, get back, or I will kill her. I will kill her, and then I will kill him. He began to drag May backward, toward the cliff edge, toward Ash. Ash! May screamed, her eyes wide with terror. Silas, no! Boone yelled, lowering his rifle, his face white. You thought you could stop me, Kincaid snarled, his hot, brandy-laced breath in May's ear. You think a raggedy girl like you can change the rules of the game? I own this territory. I am the law. He was now standing over Ash, who was still on his knees. Kincaid laughed, a high, unhinged sound. Look at you now, he spat at Ash. The great warrior, dying in the dirt. He raised his gun to press it harder against May's head. And in that second, Ash moved. With a roar that was not human, a sound of pure, primal rage. He surged up from the ground. He was not a wounded man. He was a force of nature. He did not grab for Kincaid's gun. He drove his shoulder, with all of his remaining weight, into Kincaid's knees. The impact was brutal. Kincaid, his balance gone, fired his gun, the bullet going wild, zinging off the canyon wall. He lost his grip on May, who fell sideways, gasping. Kincaid stumbled, his arms windmilling. He was at the very edge of the narrow canyon, a sheer 200-foot drop to the riverbed below. He tried to right himself, his polished boots scraping on the loose gravel. For one long, silent moment, he was balanced on the precipice. Ash was on his hands and knees, his head down, his body spent. Kincaid looked at him. He looked at Boone. He looked at the sky. And then, with a small, undignified shriek, he was gone. The sound of his fall was lost in the wind. He vanished. There was no glory. There was no final battle. There was just an empty space where he had been. The canyon was silent. The gunfire was over. The only sounds were the wind, the moans of the wounded, and the sound of May scrambling on her hands and knees. She reached Ash. He had collapsed onto his side, his face gray, his eyes closed. The rock beneath him was dark with blood. "No," May whispered. "No, no, no." She crawled to him, grabbing his shoulders, pulling his head into her lap. His blood, dark and hot, soaked into her blue dress, staining it black. "Ash," she pleaded, her voice a raw, torn sound. "Ash, wake up, please. Look at me." She ripped a piece of her own skirt, her hands clumsy, and pressed it, hard, against the wound in his side. He groaned, a low, animal sound, but his eyes did not open. "Someone help me!" she screamed at the men who were standing, stunned, watching them. "Boone, Ben, help me!" Ben and the sheriff ran forward. "He is cold," May sobbed, her hands on Ash's face, which was now clammy and pale. "Oh God, he is so cold." She bent her head low, her own tears falling onto his scarred cheek, her lips near his ear. She did not care who was watching. She did not care about the law, or the land, or anything else. "Listen to me," she whispered, her voice a desperate, fierce prayer. "You cannot leave me. Do you hear me? You cannot die. I never saw this as a one-day marriage." "Not really. Not after the first hour. It was never just a paper. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. So you cannot die. Do not you dare die." The world was gray and spinning. Ash was floating, the pain a distant, dull throb. He was so tired. He just wanted to sleep, to let the cold take him. But then, he heard her. Her voice, it was a small, fierce light in the cold. Gray-dark, it was pulling him back. "I love you. Do not you dare die." He fought the cold. He fought the darkness. It was the hardest fight of his life. He felt hands on him, rough but gentle. He felt himself being lifted. He heard old Ben's voice, roaring. "Get the doctor. Get him from town. Tell him I will pay him double. Just get him here now." He woke, hours later. The world was still blurry, but it was not the canyon. He was lying on something soft. A bed, his own bed, in the cabin. The light was dim, and the room smelled of whiskey and carbolic acid. "He is awake," a voice said. "Old Ben." "Do not you move, son," another voice said. The town doctor, a man with tired eyes and stained hands, was leaning over him, sewing a neat black thread through his skin. "You are a lucky, lucky man. The bullet went clean through, missed your vitals by an inch. You will live, though you will be mad about it for a few weeks." Ash ignored him. He looked past the doctor, past Ben. May was in the corner. She was covered in his blood, her blue dress stiff and dark, her face a pale, tear-streaked, exhausted mask. She was just sitting there, her hands clenched in her lap, watching him,
She saw his eyes open. She saw him look at her. He was alive. She did not cry. She did not move. She just met his gaze. The doctor and Ben left them, muttering about rest and broth. The cabin was silent. Ash looked at her. He remembered. The gray fog, the cold, and her voice, pulling him back. "May," he whispered. His throat was raw. She came to the bed, her movements stiff. She sat on the floor, next to his cot, and put her hand on his, the one that was resting on the blanket. Her hand was shaking. "The doctor said you will be fine," she whispered. He turned his hand over, his fingers, weak but determined, lacing with hers. His grip was light, but it was a chain. "I heard you," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. May's breath hitched. She could not look at him. The doctor said you were—" "In the canyon," he said, his grip tightening just a fraction. "I heard your words." May closed her eyes, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping her. "If I had died?" Ash whispered, his voice gaining a small, sharp sliver of strength. "If I had died in that canyon?" He waited until she opened her eyes and looked at him. "I would have died as your husband," he said, his dark eyes holding hers, pulling her in. "Not as a man you hired." She looked at him, at the truth in his eyes, a truth that was as solid and real as the mountains outside. The contract was gone. The paper was gone. The lies, the fear. The one day it had all been burned away in the fire and the blood. All that was left was this, her hand in his, a man and a woman. "Get some rest," she whispered, her voice breaking, as a single, hot tear, a tear of pure, unadulterated relief, fell onto his hand. "You, too," he murmured, his eyes already closing, but his grip on her hand did not loosen. He would not let her go. Ash did not heal quickly, but he healed. The wound in his side was deep, and for the first week, he was bound to the bed, a fever his constant, restless companion. May did not leave his side. She was a silent, exhausted shadow, her life reduced to boiling water, cleaning the wound as the doctor had shown her, and holding his hand in the dark when the fever dreams came. Jamie, brought back from the caves by Naomi, was her small, steady helper. The boy's terror had been replaced by a quiet, solemn sense of purpose. He sat by Ash's bed for hours, holding a cup of water, waiting for the man he idolized to wake. The cabin was a small, quiet, waiting world, suspended in the aftermath of the violence. The town, however, was not quiet. The fall of Silas Kincaid had left a vacuum, and the explosion of the truth had left the entire community reeling. They had been lied to, manipulated, and led to the brink of a massacre by a man they had feared and respected. A week after the fight, a new man rode into town. He was not a judge. He was a territorial marshal, a tall, gaunt man with cold blue eyes and a badge that had seen too much sun. He was not here to preside. He was here to investigate. The second hearing was held in the same town hall, but the atmosphere was entirely different. It was not a trial. It was an inquiry. There was no defendant's table. Ash, his side tightly bound, his face pale but his eyes clear, sat in the front row. May was beside him. This time, she was not his co-conspirator. She was his wife, and the entire town knew it. The marshal was brutally efficient. He called Silas Kincaid's hired guns first. The three men, sled among them, were now in chains, their bluster gone, replaced by the desperate, cringing fear of men who could feel a rope around their necks. "He paid us," Sled said, his voice a low, fast monotone, his eyes on the floor. "He paid us to attack the girl on the road, just to scare her. He paid us to burn his own camp. He wrote it down. A contract, so we would know he was good for the money." The contract, mud-stained and singed at the edges, was presented as evidence. A collective hiss of indrawn breath went through the room. The marshal then called Agent Crowley. The agent, his face a sickly gray, his hands shaking so badly he could barely take the oath, was a broken man. He confessed everything, the bribes, the false testimony, the lies about Ash. He whimpered, a man who had just been following orders from a very powerful man. The marshal ordered him taken into custody, his career and his life in ruins. Finally, the marshal looked to the back of the room. Sheriff Boone. Sheriff Boone walked to the front, his steps heavy. He was not wearing his badge. He had set it on the table before the marshal when the inquiry began. "Sheriff," the marshal said, his voice not unkind, "you were present at the fire. You were present at the canyon. You issued the warrant for Mr. and Mrs. Nez. Tell this inquiry what you saw." Boone stood for a long moment, looking not at the marshal, but at the town he had served. He looked at the ranchers, the townswomen, the shopkeepers. He looked at old Ben. Then he turned and looked directly at May and at Ash. I was a fool," Boone said, his voice a low, thick rumble of shame. "I was a coward. I knew Silas Kincaid was a bad man. I knew it in my gut, but I took his money. I took his donations for the town jail. I let him buy my silence." He took a deep breath. "I believed his lies because it was easier than doing my job. I led those men. I signed the warrant. When the shooting started, and I saw that fire, I knew Kincaid was behind it, but I did not stop it. I was afraid." He looked at May. Mrs. Nez, she found me. She showed me the proof. She had more courage in her one small body than I had in my entire office. She rode back into that fight, and I just sat there." He turned back to the marshal. "And then I saw what happened in that canyon. I saw Silas Kincaid take her hostage. I saw him try to murder her, and I saw Ash Nez, wounded and bleeding, throw himself at Kincaid to save his wife. Ash Nez did what the law in this town, was too slow and too cowardly to do. He protected this community. He protected one of our own." The room was utterly silent. I am deeply sorry," Boone said, his voice thick. "For all of it. I am not fit to wear the badge. I am resigning my post, effective immediately." He turned to leave, but old Ben's voice roared from the back of the room. "And let you off that easy," Ben shouted, standing up. "I do not think so." Boone stopped, his back rigid. "You are right, Boone," Ben said, walking down the aisle. "You were a coward. You were a fool. And you took his money. You failed this town. You failed them." He pointed at May and Ash. "But I have known you for 20 years. You are not a murderer, and you are not a liar. Not when it counts. You just told the truth in a room full of people you have known your whole life. That takes, well, it takes something." He looked at the marshal. "Marshal, he is right. He should not be sheriff, not today, but a man who does wrong and admits it. That is a man you can rebuild. I say we let him resign." And then Ben grinned. "I say we hold a new election, right here, and rehire the idiot, on the condition that he uses his first paycheck to buy Ash and May Nez a new door." A ripple of stunned laughter went through the room. One of the ranchers stood up. "I will second that. Boone, you are a fool, but you are our fool. You fix what you broke." "That is right," another voice called. Boone stood there, his shoulders shaking, as the town he had failed, one by one, offered him a grace he did not deserve. The marshal rapped his gavel. "This is not an election," he barked, but he was smiling, just slightly. "The matter of Sheriff Boone is a local one. My matter is this." He held up the burned contract. "This inquiry finds that Silas Kincaid did willfully and maliciously conspire to commit fraud, arson, and attempted murder. His death in the canyon is ruled a result of his own violent actions." He looked at Ash. "This inquiry formally clears Ash Nez and the dying people he represents of any and all wrongdoing. The actions taken were in self-defense, against a clear and present threat. This community owes them an apology. He shuffled his papers. One last thing. The matter of the land, the original fraud case is, as of this moment, dismissed with extreme prejudice. The marriage, he looked at May, then at Ash, is deemed valid, legally, and, as we have all seen. In fact, the bank's claim is nullified, the land title. He picked up a new, clean sheet of paper and a pen. Will be reissued by the territorial office. To Mrs. May Callahan Nez and her husband, Mr. Ash Nez. He signed the paper with a flourish. It was done. The walk home from the town hall was surreal. The same people who had whispered and stared, who had called May a fool and Ash a savage, now stepped aside. They nodded. The ranchers touched the brims of their hats to May, and then to Ash. Mr. Nez, one of them said, stepping forward. That was good shooting in that canyon. You saved us a lot of trouble. Ash just nodded, his face impassive, and kept walking. One of the townswomen, the one who had been the most vocal in her disapproval, rushed up to May, her hands full. Mrs. Nez, May, I made some broth for your husband and a small cake for the boy. May, stunned, took the basket. Thank you, she whispered. The town was not healed. It was not perfect. She could still feel the lingering stares, the unease, but the wall had been breached. A single crack of light had broken through. Life on the homestead slowly found its new rhythm. Ash's wound healed, leaving a new, puckered scar on his side, a companion to the one on his face. He was quiet, but the coldness was gone, replaced by a deep, watchful care. Jamie blossomed. With the land secure, May could afford the proper medicine from Tucson. The town doctor, who now visited them weekly, brought it himself. Ash, as he regained his own strength, took the boy under his wing. He did not teach him to shoot a bow, not yet. He taught him to breathe. The air is your first medicine, he would say, sitting with the boy on the porch in the cool morning. Breathe in the mountain. Breathe out the sickness. Slow, like the hawk on the wind. Jamie grew stronger. The pale, papery look left his skin. A faint, healthy color returned to his cheeks. He began to walk, further and further each day. He wrote a story for his Sunday school class, the one he took at the church, about my friend, Ash, the hero. A story that was read aloud by Reverend Pike. A story that made the entire town shift uncomfortably, and then proudly, in their pews. The healing spread. One cool evening, as the sun was setting, Naomi rode to their cabin. She was not alone. She brought her husband and two of the elders, including Hastinyazi, the old man who had shunned Ash. They did not come empty-handed. They brought corn, fresh ground meal, and a beautifully woven blanket. Ash and May met them at the door. Ash stood before the old man and bowed his head. Grandfather. Yazzie looked at Ash. He looked at the healing scar on his side. He looked at the cabin, now repaired. He looked at May, standing beside her husband, unafraid. You have bled for this land, the old man said, his voice a low rasp. And you, he looked at May, you have bled for him. You have stood by him. You have fought for him. He placed his hand on Ash's shoulder. You have not walked a path alone. You have brought your path to ours. Naomi smiled. We are holding a blessing, she said, a ceremony of thanks for the water, which is clean again, for the land, which is at peace. We would be honored if you would join us. That night, for the first time, May, Ash, and Jamie crossed the line. They went to the Navajo camp, not as intruders, but as family. Old Ben came too, and to everyone's surprise, so did Sheriff Boone. They sat around a large, bright fire. They shared smoked mutton and sweet corn cakes,
They listened to the low, rhythmic chant of the healing song. It was not a party. It was something older. It was a mending. May watched as Sheriff Boone, his hat in his hands, sat with the Navajo elders, sharing a pipe. She watched Jamie laugh as one of the Navajo boys showed him a string game. She looked at Ash, sitting beside her, his face calm and peaceful in the firelight. He was home, and she realized so was she. Weeks passed. The late summer heat gave way to the crisp, cool nights of autumn. The new door, paid for by Sheriff Boone, was hung. The well was deepened. The cabin was warm. Ash had built a second bed for Jamie, who no longer needed to sleep by the fire. One night, after Jamie was sound asleep, May and Ash sat at the small table, the same table where he had first traced the letters in her father's Bible. The lamp cast a warm, golden glow. The silence between them was no longer awkward or tense. It was comfortable, but there was still a shadow, a single, unspoken thing. "Ash," May said, her voice quiet. She was tracing the grain of the wood with her finger. "I am here," he said. We never talked about it. The real reason, my plan." He was still for a moment. "I remember your plan," he said, his voice quiet. "I was a fool," she whispered, her face burning with the memory. "I was so desperate and so arrogant. I walked into your home. I offered you money. I tried to buy your honor." She looked up, her eyes bright. "I am so sorry. Ash, I was wrong." Ash looked at her, his gaze steady. "You were," he said, and she flinched, but he continued, his voice soft. "You were a fool, and you were desperate, and you were a white woman, thinking like a white woman. You thought everything had a price." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm. "And I," he said, his voice a low confession. "I was a fool, too. I was filled with pride and with hate. I hated what you were, what you represented. I saw your plan, and I used it. I told Naomi I would use your law against you. I saw it as a war. I took your desperate offer and I twisted it. I made it a cage. For both of us. You made it a promise," May whispered. "You told me you would be my husband, and you were, when I did not deserve it." "We were two fools, May," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Playing a dangerous game, for all the wrong reasons, but I think we won." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. He led her not to the bed, but to the small fire he had built in the hearth. "You have a scar," he said, his voice a low murmur. "What?" she asked, confused. "Here," he said, and his fingers, so rough, so calloused, very gently touched her temple. "From the man on the road, the first fight, when you hit the wagon." She had not even known it was there, a tiny, pale line near her hairline. He leaned in, his gaze impossibly tender, and he kissed her. Not the desperate, stormy kiss of the dust storm, not the chaste, public kiss of the church. This was the first, true kiss. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was full of all the words they could not say. It was a promise. It was an apology. It was a beginning. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "There are no more contracts. May," he whispered. "No more games." "No," she breathed. He lifted her, as easily as if she were a child, and carried her the few steps to their bed. He laid her down gently, and for the first time he lay down beside her, not as a guard, or a stranger, or a protector, but as her husband. He touched the scar on her temple again, a feather-light brush. "My wife," he murmured. And in the warm, quiet dark of the cabin, as the desert wind sang its low, lonely song outside, the two broken, mismatched pieces of their lives finally, truly became one. 1 year had passed. The snows of one winter had come and melted, and the heat of another summer had baked the land. Now, it was autumn, a time of clear, cold nights and warm, golden afternoons. The wind that blew across the high desert still carried the scent of sage and dust, but the smell of smoke from the Kincaid camp was a long-dead memory, a scar on the land that was already fading. The Kincaid railroad line was gone. His empire, built on a foundation of lies, greed, and stolen paper, had crumbled into ruin after his death. When the territorial marshal's report had been filed, the investors in the East had pulled their money, and the entire venture had collapsed, leaving nothing but a few miles of rusting track and the memory of a tyrant. But progress, as old Ben Harper often said, always finds a way. The railroad had come. It was just a different line, a smaller, humbler one, run by a different company. It passed 5 miles south of their land, following the gentler, wider pass that Kincaid, in his arrogance, had ignored. And at the dusty crossroads, where the main town road met the old freight trail, there was a new building. It was not a grand depot. It was a simple, sturdy, plank-wood structure with a single platform and a sign that read, in neat black letters, Coyote Creek Stop. It was not owned by one man. It was managed by a community board. Old Ben Harper was the chairman. Sheriff Boone was on it, and in a move that had sent quiet shockwaves through the territory. So was Naomi B. Gay, representing the interests of the dying, the true center of this new, fragile world. However, was the homestead, May and Ash's home. The cabin was no longer a symbol of poverty. It was a symbol of endurance. The roof was new and tight. The door, a gift from Sheriff Boone, was thick oak and hung straight on its hinges. The well Ash had dug was deep and provided water so cold and clear that teamsters would stop just to fill their canteens. The old, rotting fence was gone, replaced by a solid, well-built corral that held 3 good horses and May's old mare, Patience, who was now living a life of lazy retirement. And beside the cabin, its doorway facing the rising sun, stood a new, perfectly built hogan. Ash had built it with the help of his cousins, the logs sealed tight with mud and cedar. It was his place, a place of quiet, of smoke, of spirit. May's home was the log cabin. His home was the hogan. Their home was the solid, respected earth that lay between them. It was not one culture erasing the other. It was two, standing side by side, stronger together than they had ever been apart. They had built a long, covered porch onto the front of the cabin, and this had become the new trading post. It was not grand, but it was busy. May sold hot coffee, fresh-baked bread, and jars of preserved peaches. Her mending business had never been better. Ash sold cured horse tack and carved juniper wood tools, and on long, clean tables. Naomi and the other women from the high canyons displayed their blankets. The brilliant reds and blues, a slash of defiant color against the brown desert. Teamsters, ranchers, and even the occasional traveler from the train would stop. It was a place of business, but it was also a place of peace. The greatest transformation, however, was Jamie. He was 13 years old now, and he was tall. His 14th birthday was in the spring. The thin, pale, papery look was gone. His shoulders had broadened. His cough was a distant memory. The breathing exercises Ash had taught him, combined with the security of his home and the proper medicine May could now afford, had worked a quiet, profound miracle. His heart was still weak, the doctor said, but it was steady. He was no longer the sick boy. He was, in fact, the manager of the trading post. He kept the ledger, his father's elegant script now mirrored in his own neat, clean hand. He could speak enough Navajo to trade jokes with Ash's cousins, and his English was clear and sharp as he counted out change for the teamsters. He was, May thought, watching him one afternoon as he seriously debated the price of a bag of flour with a rancher.
whole. He was a complete person, a man in the making, and the dark shadows had left his eyes. One evening, he had come to them, his face serious in the firelight. "I want a school," he had announced. May had paused, her mending needle in mid-air. "A school, honey." "Yes," he said, his voice clear. Not quite a boy's, not yet a man's. "Right here. We can fix up the old shed. I can teach the letters, the ones you taught me, and Hostine, Naomi's son. He can teach the dine words. We can have a place, for both, for the rancher kids and for the Navajo kids, together." Ash had looked at the boy for a long time, his scarred face unreadable. Then he had nodded, once. "It is a good dream, Jamie, it is a strong dream. In the spring, we will build the benches." Coyote Bend itself had changed. The brittle, violent energy was gone. The fear and suspicion had not vanished entirely. There were still old fools in town, men who would mutter into their beer about savages and white women. But they were the minority now. Their voices were the ones that were drowned out. Sheriff Boone, grayer and thinner, still wore the badge. He was a quiet man now, a fair one. He had, as Ben had suggested, fixed his mistake. He rode out to the homestead once a week, not on official business, but to sit on the porch, drink a cup of maize coffee, and talk with Ash about the weather, or the price of cattle. He was a man who had looked into the abyss, seen his own cowardice, and had been given a second chance. He was not wasting it. Old Ben's saloon was still the loudest place in town on a Saturday, but the clientele had changed. On market days, Navajo men, including Naomi's husband, would ride into town to trade, and they would stand at Ben's long, polished bar, a glass of beer in hand. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the ranchers from the bar T, there was no trouble. There was just business. The love between May and Ash was like the desert itself. It was not a loud or showy thing. It was not full of easy words or grand gestures. It was quiet. It was deep, and it was as strong and unyielding as the red rock of the canyons. It was in the way he watched her, his work pausing as she crossed the yard, his eyes following her as if she were the only thing in the landscape. It was in the way she would bring him a cup of water in the afternoon heat, her hand brushing his, a small, certain touch that spoke volumes. It was in the easy silence that sat between them at the end of the day, a silence that was not empty, but full. They were two parts of one whole, two people who had been broken by the world and had been mended, not by a miracle, but by the slow, steady, hard work of choosing each other, day after day. One evening, they were closing the post. The sun was setting, and the air was growing cold. Ash was carefully folding one of Naomi's heavy blankets, and May was at the table, counting the day's coins into a wooden box. She laughed, a small, soft sound that startled him. Ash looked at her. "What is it?" She smiled, a slow, warm smile that lit her whole face, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "I was just thinking," she said. "I was just remembering. Do you remember that day, the day I rode into your camp, like a mad woman?" A small, very rare smile touched Ash's lips. He stopped his work and leaned against the porch rail, looking at her. "I remember," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I tried to hire you," she said, her face flushing, a mix of old shame and new amusement. "I offered you $3 silver for your name." "I remember," he said. "I was such a fool," May whispered, shaking her head. "I was so arrogant, and I was so terrified." "You were," he agreed, his eyes full of a warm, soft light she had never seen that first day. "It was, I think, the most foolish contract I have ever been offered." "I am so sorry, Ash," she said, her smile fading, her voice full of the old guilt. He pushed off the rail and came to her. He stood before her, blocking the last light of the sun. He took the wooden coin box from her hands and set it on the table. Then he cupped her face in his scarred, warm hands. "It was," he said, his voice soft, "also the wisest thing I have ever done." He kissed her, a long, slow, comfortable kiss that tasted of coffee and wood smoke and a love as solid as the ground beneath their feet. Later, as the last sliver of the sun disappeared, they stood on the small hill behind their cabin. It was the same hill from which he used to watch her, a lifetime ago, when she was a desperate woman trying to mend a rotten fence. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out over their land, their valley. Below them, in the yard between the cabin and the hogan, a small, bright fire burned. Jamie was there. His voice, clear and strong, carried on the cool, still air. He was laughing. He was not alone. He was playing a game of tag with two other children, a Navajo boy and girl, Naomi's children. Their laughter, mixed and bright, echoed in the growing twilight. In the far, far distance, miles to the south, the new railroad, the one that had been built with peace instead of blood, sent a thin plume of white smoke into the purple sky. It was just a line on the horizon, a part of the world, but not a threat. It was just there. The vast, open sky stretched over them all, a blanket of deepening blue that made no distinction between the log cabin and the earth-built hogan, between the pale-skinned boy and the dark-skinned children. May shivered, a small tremor from the first real cold of the night. Ash put his arm around her, pulling her close, into the warmth of his side. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her body fitting against his as if it had been made to be there. She took his hand, the one that was resting on her waist, and moved it, placing it flat against her own stomach. She held it there, covering his strong, scarred hand with her own. "Ash," she whispered. "I am here," he answered. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice quiet but strong, her gaze fixed on the laughing children below. "Whatever comes, I will never call you a one-day husband again." Ash was silent for a long moment. He looked down at their joined hands, resting on the slight, new, and unmistakable curve of her belly. He looked out at the vast, darkening desert, his home. "Good," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he would never name. "Because I plan on being your husband until this desert blooms green." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more folks. We appreciate every one of you.